Welcome, dear listener, to a quiet evening shaped entirely for your rest. Settle yourself into whatever softness surrounds you now, a warm blanket pulled gently to your chin, a pillow that knows the shape of your dreaming head, the slow and patient hush of the room around you. There is nothing you must do here, nothing you must remember, nothing you must understand. The only journey ahead is a gentle one taken at the unhurried pace of slowly falling snow. Imagine, if you will, that the world beyond your window has slipped quietly backwards through the centuries. The street lights have softened into flickering oil lamps, the roads have narrowed into frost-laced lanes, and somewhere far beyond the glow of any modern thing, a great stone monastery stands waiting, half hidden by the slow drift of midwinter snow. Its towers rise in muted greys against a sky the colour of pale lavender. Its windows glow with the warm, honeyed amber of distant candlelight. Its bells, though silent now, seem to remember every gentle chime they have ever rung. You are not asked to walk there. You need only to drift, to breathe, to let the soft tide of this old story carry you closer, slowly, gently, the way deep snow gathers upon an ancient wooden gate. There is no hurry in this place, there is no urgency in this hour. There is only the soft promise of a forgotten world, opening its weathered doors quietly, just for you this night. Before we cross the threshold of this ancient place, before our slow breath warms the cold stone air of those long-lost halls, allow me one quiet moment, no longer than a candle flame steadying itself in a draught. If the soft hush of these words has begun to settle the day from your shoulders, if your eyes are growing heavy with the weight of pleasant evening fatigue, you may wish to gently press the small bell beside the screen, the one shaped like a dark little chime, so that future tales like this may find their way to you on quieter nights yet to come. Think of it as nothing more than lighting a single tallow candle in a window, a small flickering signal that whispers to the wandering storyteller, "Yes, you are welcome here. Please return again." Subscription are like a quiet tap upon a glowing icon. These are the modern equivalents of a humble traveller leaving a coin upon a windowsill in thanks for shelter from the storm. They cost you nothing. They take from you nothing. They ask of you nothing further than a single soft gesture, made without breaking the slow rhythm of your breath. And once that small kindness is offered, you may release the world entirely. Lay your hands open. Let your shoulders soften. Let the room melt around you. For now, your journey truly begins, slow as a snowflake, patient as old stone, gentle as a long-forgotten lullaby coming home. The road that leads toward the monastery is not truly a road at all. Not in the way the modern mind imagines such things, with its smooth grey surfaces and its painted lines and its purposeful direction. It is instead a slow and meandering ribbon of pale earth, half remembered beneath a quilt of fresh winter snow, half forgotten beneath the silvered hush of a low-hanging mist that has settled into the valley like a soft grey shawl pulled close around the shoulders of the sleeping land. The road dips gently, the way an old hand dips a quill into ink, slow and deliberate, taking its time, in no hurry to arrive anywhere at all. It rises again with a patient sigh, climbing the gentle shoulder of a low hill before falling once more into a hollow where the frost has gathered in delicate lace-like patterns upon every stone, every twig, every patient blade of withered winter grass. Around you, the world has been muted into the softest of palettes, the colours of the autumn that came before. Those riotous reds and copper bronzes and fierce burning oranges have all been folded gently away like festival linens packed into a cedar chest until another season calls for them. What remains is a study in quietude, the pale grey of bare birch trunks, the deep slate of distant pine forests, the soft cream of frozen meadows, the faint blush of a low winter sun that hides itself shyly behind a veil of cloud, casting everything into a dim, dreaming half-light that is neither morning nor evening, but something gentler in between, a hush hour known only to those who walk in winter. The snow underfoot is not the brittle, biting snow of the deep, cold months, the kind that crunches sharply and bites at the toes through the thinnest of leather shoes. No, This snow is older snow, settled snow, snow that has lain upon the earth for many long days and many longer nights, until it has grown soft and yielding, almost feathered, almost drowsy itself. It folds beneath the imagined weight of your steps with the gentlest of whispers, a sound like dry parchment being slowly turned, like silk dragged softly across a wooden floor, like a sleeper exhaling into the quiet of a curtained room. There is no echo here. The snow drinks every sound. The mist swallows every echo. The air itself seems to hold its breath in reverence of the quiet. Far ahead, just where the lane curves around the rising shoulder of the hill, the first true sign of the monastery reveals itself, and it does so with such gentle modesty that you might almost mistake it for a trick of the eye, a wandering thought, a dream half remembered. It is only the faintest plume of wood smoke rising in a slow, lazy column from somewhere beyond the trees, curling upward into the pale grey sky in a soft serpentine ribbon that bends and folds and unfurls itself with the same patient grace as a slowly waking cat. The smoke smells of oak and of beech and of something older still, something faintly sweet, perhaps the resinous breath of dried pine kindling, perhaps the lingering ghost of last summer's herbs hung up in the rafters of a kitchen long since closed for the day. You walk on, though walking is too eager a word for the slow drift that carries you. You glide, you float, you move the way one moves in a half-remembered dream, where distances dissolve and time itself becomes a kind of velvet. The road bends once more, and the trees on either side begin to thin, their bare branches giving way to broader, gentler open ground, and the mist, the kind grey mist that has been your companion all this while, begins very slowly to lift, to thin, draw itself upward like a great theatre curtain rising upon a long-awaited scene. And there, at last, you see it. The monastery rises from the snow as if it had grown there of its own accord, the way a great mossy boulder grows from a hillside, the way a slow oak grows from a forgotten acorn left long ago in the soft dark earth. It does not assert itself, it does not announce itself. It simply is the way the hills are, the way the river is, the way the slow turning of the seasons is, a thing so entirely at peace within its own being that it requires no introduction at all. Its walls are the colour of weathered bone, of pale river stones polished smooth by centuries of patient water, of the silvered grey that lives in the bark of very old beech trees. They rise from the snow with that quiet gravity that only old stones possess, the kind of stones that have stood through summers no living person now remembers, through winters that even the eldest of the village grandmothers cannot quite recall, through the soft passage of generations who built and prayed and laboured and slept, and were finally laid to rest beneath the same quiet earth their feet once warmed. The roof of the great church is a long, low slope of dark slate, half buried beneath a thick mantle of fresh snow that softens every line, gentles every angle until the building seems less a work of human hands and more a slow dreaming creature curled up against the cold. From the high ridge of the roof rises a slender stone tower, square and stout with narrow arched openings near its crown, where the great bells hang silent, for now hooded with snow, dreaming of the moment when their ropes will be drawn down and their bronze throats will sing again across the white silence of the valley. Around the church, like patient hens gathered close around a roosting mother, clusters the rest of the monastery. There is the cloister, with its low-pitched roof and its slender colonnade of pale stone arches, each arch holding within itself a perfect rectangle of grey winter sky. There is the dormitory, a long, low building with small, deep-set windows and a single thin trail of smoke rising from its chimney. There is the refectory, broader and lower, with its great kitchen range exhaling its slow plume of fragrant cooking smoke. There is the chapter house, the scriptorium, the infirmary, the guest house, the granary, the brewery, the cellars, the bakehouse, the stables, the gardens lying fallow beneath the snow, the orchards with their sleeping fruit trees stretching their bare branches toward the muted sky like figures lifting their hands in patient prayer. Each building leans gently toward the others, sharing warmth, sharing shelter, sharing the long, slow rhythm of a life lived in common purpose, in common prayer, in common silence. High stone wall encircles the whole, weathered and lichen-freckled, half drowned in drifts of snow at its northern face. And in the centre of that wall, set within an arched gateway of dark oak studded with iron, stands a single small wooden door, slightly ajar, glowing softly from within, with the warm golden candle-coloured light of a place that has been tending its own quiet flames for more centuries than the snow itself can remember. You drift toward it, and it seems almost to drift toward you. The threshold waits, the hush deepens, and somewhere far inside those old kind walls, a single voice begins very softly to sing. The small wooden door within the great arched gateway gives way to your imagined touch with the softest of yieldings, the way an old book opens to a page that has been turned many thousands of times before, the spine well loved, the paper grown soft and pliant with the patient affection of countless gentle hands. It does not creak in the way one might expect of so ancient a thing. The hinges have been tended carefully, lovingly, by a long succession of careful brothers who have stood in this very threshold and dripped warm goose grease into the dark iron joints upon a quiet afternoon, smoothing away every potential complaint, every possible groan, until the door has learned to open and close with the gentle exhalation of a sleeper turning softly upon a pillow. There is wisdom in that quiet, an awareness that a door which protests too loudly disturbs the deep peace that the walls have laboured so long to gather, and so the brothers have made their threshold gentle, and the threshold in turn has made their welcome gentler still. You step within, though your stepping leaves no print upon the dusting of snow that has drifted in across the worn stone sill. The air shifts immediately, perceptibly in that particular way that air always shifts when one passes from the open winter world into a place that has been carefully tended by the slow labour of many hearths. The cold is not banished, not entirely, for no medieval building knows that kind of pampered warmth, but the cold is softened here, eased like a sharp word turned into a gentle one, like a biting wind translated into a passing breath. The temperature inside the gatehouse passage is perhaps only a little warmer than the air outside, but it carries within it the memory of warmth, the promise of warmth, the slow accumulating warmth of stones that have been holding within themselves the small heats of small fires for many long quiet centuries. The passage of the gatehouse is short, no more than 8 or 10 paces long, but it is a passage of deliberate ceremony, a small soft vestibule between two worlds. The walls on either side rise high and unadorned, the stone left rough and honest, with only the faintest patina of pale lichen creeping along the lowermost courses where the damp of the ground sometimes whispers up through the foundations. The ceiling above is a low-pointed barrel vault, blackened in places by the slow centuries of soot from the lantern that hangs upon a long iron chain at the very heart of the passage, swaying ever so faintly in the cross breath of the doorway, casting its small puddle of golden light upon the worn flagstones beneath. Those flagstones are themselves a small history. They have been worn into shallow, soft basins by the patient passage of feet, sandalled feet, booted feet, the bare feet of penitents who have crossed this threshold at the height of summer, the muffled feet of pilgrims wrapped in rags against the bitter cold. The hollows in the stone are not deep, no more than the breadth of a finger at their lowest point, but they speak with quiet eloquence of the long unbroken procession of arrivals and departures that has flowed through this gate since the first stones were laid. To stand upon them is to stand within a current of patient time, to feel oneself become, however briefly, another small stitch in the long, slow, invisible thread of all who have ever paused here and taken the gentlest of breaths before continuing onward. To the right of the passage, set into the thickness of the wall, opens a small doorway giving into the porter's lodge. This is the keeping place, the watchful heart, the soft attentive ear of the entire enclosure. The porter is the brother, charged with the gentle guardianship of this threshold, the one whose long quiet hours are spent not in heroic labours, but in the simpler, deeper work of being present, of being awake, of being ready to receive whoever might come knocking at the gate, whether they arrive in the brightness of midday or in the bone-deep dark of a midwinter night. He is, in his quiet way, the keeper of the monastery's hospitality, for the rule of the order holds that any stranger who comes to the door must be received as if they were the Christ himself returning unannounced, and so the porter must always be ready, always patient, always kind. The lodge is a small chamber, scarcely larger than the cell of a single brother, with a low ceiling crossed by dark oak beams that have been blackened by centuries of candle smoke, and the soft constant breath of the small hearth set into the eastern wall. The hearth itself is no grand fireplace, only a modest opening of soot-stained stone with a single small iron crane from which hangs a battered copper kettle, gently steaming, perpetually warm, ready to offer a cup of hot tisane to any cold traveller who might appear at the gate with chapped hands and snow upon the brow. The fire within is small, frugal, only a few patient coals and a single thin log. But it has been tended so carefully, so continuously, that it never quite goes out, even in the depths of the longest winter night. Upon a low wooden bench beside the hearth sits the porter himself, an elder brother whose face has been gentled by a lifetime of soft duty. His habit is the deep undyed brown of unbleached wool, much patched at the elbows and at the hem, where many years of kneeling upon stone and bending toward strangers have worn the fabric thin. Scapular of slightly darker cloth hangs over his shoulders, and at his waist is knotted a simple cord from which depends a small wooden cross polished smooth by the constant absent touch of his own thumb across the long quiet hours. His face is finely lined, the lines of a man who has smiled often and frowned seldom, and his beard is the colour of birch bark in the early light, more silver now than the chestnut it once was. His eyes are kind, patient, a soft-watered grey, and they rest upon the small book open in his lap, though he is not really reading it just now, only resting his gaze upon the familiar shapes of the letters the way one rests one's gaze upon a distant horizon when the soul wishes to be still. The lodge itself contains only what is needed and nothing that is not. A small writing desk near the window, where the porter records the names of those who arrive, in a slow, careful hand upon a long parchment scroll. Wooden shelf bearing a single oil lamp, a tinder box, a small earthenware jug of water, 2 simple wooden cups, and a bundle of dry rushes for the lighting of fire. Heavy iron ring of large dark keys hanging from a peg in the wall, each key the size of a small spoon, each tagged with a small wooden disc bearing the name of the door it belongs to in faded ink. Narrow cot in the corner, covered with a coarse woolen blanket the colour of old porridge, where the porter takes such brief rests as his vigil allows. Small wooden bowl of dried apple slices and a few withered hazelnuts, kept ready for any hungry guest who may need a bite before the next proper meal. And there, beside the bench, great brass bell upon a wooden stand, polished by the porter's own slow hand, ready at any moment to be lifted and rung softly, gently, announce the arrival of a stranger to the rest of the sleeping enclosure beyond. You drift onward, leaving the soft warmth of the porter's lodge behind, and the gatehouse passage opens at its further end into a low arched doorway that gives directly upon the cloister. Here, before you take another step in your imagined wandering, pause, and let your eyes adjust, the way one's eyes must always adjust when passing from a small enclosed space into something vast and open and breathing, with its own slow grandeur. For the cloister, even half hidden beneath the soft burden of midwinter snow, is the green beating heart of the entire enclosure, the still centre around which every other building has been carefully and lovingly arranged, the gentle, silent room around which the whole long meditation of monastic life slowly turns. The cloister is a square, or near enough to a square that the eye accepts it as one without ever quite measuring its true proportions. Its 4 sides are formed by a covered walkway of pale stone, a sheltered ambulatory of low-pointed arches that runs the entire perimeter of the open garth at its centre. The arches themselves are slender and modest, paired in graceful couplings that share between them a single delicate central column, and the columns are crowned with simple capitals carved into shapes that whisper of the natural world. A curl of acanthus leaf here, a bunch of small grapes there, bird with folded wings nestled into the corner of another, all of them softened now by the slow work of weathering, their edges gentled into something almost dreamlike by the patient erosion of countless winters past. At this hour, in this season, the cloister wears its midwinter mantle. The covered walkway on all 4 sides is dim and quiet. the flagstones gleaming faintly with the soft sheen of damp where a little melted snow has been carried in upon the hems of woolen habits or upon the soles of patient leather shoes. The covered stone above keeps the worst of the weather at bay, and so this walkway becomes in winter a kind of long sheltered thoroughfare, soft grey corridor where the brothers move from church to dormitory to refectory to chapter house without ever needing to step out into the deeper cold of the open garth. Here and there, set into the inner wall of the walkway at thoughtful intervals, are small stone benches carved directly into the masonry, where a brother who is weary or troubled or simply seeking a moment of slow reflection may sit and rest his back against the cool stone and watch the snow drift quietly down upon the open garden at the cloister's heart. And the open garth itself, the small enclosed garden held within the 4 sheltered walks, that is the secret jewel of the whole arrangement. In summer it is a place of green pathways and fragrant herbs, of small trimmed hedges of lavender and rosemary, of a single small fruit tree at its centre, perhaps an apple, perhaps a quince, depending upon the climate and the patience of the brother who tends it. In autumn the garth softens into the muted colours of seed heads and dried stalks, of the slow turning of leaves, of the last reluctant bees moving heavily over the late blossoms of time. But in winter, in this winter, in the slow quiet winter that holds the valley now in its gentle grip, the garth has been transformed entirely. It is now a smooth, still, almost luminous expanse of unbroken snow, a perfect pale square laid down within the dark embrace of the colonnade, glowing faintly with its own soft inner light. If the snow itself remembered the moonlight of last night, and was holding a little of it still within its quiet crystalline depths. No footprints mark the surface of this snow. The brothers do not walk through the garth in winter. They walk only around it beneath the shelter of the covered arches, leaving the central garden untouched, untrodden, uninterrupted, allowing it to rest in the perfect undisturbed quietude of its long winter sleep. The snow here is therefore unbroken, smooth as fresh cream poured from a wooden pitcher, soft as the down of a swan's underbelly, settled in places into gentle drifts where the wind has shaped it patiently against the bases of the columns. In other places it lies almost flat, almost sheet-like, its surface dimpled only by the small recent prints of a single inquisitive winter robin who has hopped lightly across one corner in search of some imagined seed, leaving a delicate trail of 3-pronged tracks that vanish again at the place where the small bird took flight. Above the cloister, the sky is a low close ceiling of pale pearl grey, the kind of sky that promises more snow before the day is out, though for now it withholds its gift, holding the snow within itself the way a quiet person holds an unspoken word, patiently, kindly, waiting for the proper moment. The light that falls down into the garth is a diffused, even silver light, the light of a heavily clouded winter morning, and it gives to the snow a soft luminous quality that no harsh sunlight could ever achieve. There are no sharp shadows here, there is no glare, there is only the gentle tonal gradation of pale upon paler, of cream upon ivory, of the softest white upon the softer white, until the eye itself seems to slow down and become as patient as the snow. In the very centre of the garth, half buried now beneath the white drifts, stands a small stone wellhead, low and round and modestly ornamented. Its rim is worn into a soft polished groove by centuries of buckets being drawn carefully across it, and a small wooden roof on 4 slender posts shelters it from the worst of the weather. In summer, this wellhead is the gathering point of the cloister where the gardener brother fills his watering can, and the cellarer comes to draw water for the brewery, and the kitchener fetches buckets for the great cooking pots of the refectory. But in winter the well is mostly silent, capped now with a simple wooden cover bound with iron, opened only briefly in the early morning when the kitchener brother trudges out through the covered walk with his great copper jug, and lowers a leather bucket down into the cold, dark heart of the earth, and brings it up brimming with the strange clear water that even in the bitterest weather refuses to freeze. For the well is deep, 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 and the earth at the bottom of it remembers a warmth that the surface has long since forgotten. Around the inner edge of the colonnade where the covered walkway meets the open garth, run shallow stone gutters carved directly into the threshold of the arches. In summer, these channels carry away the rainwater that drips from the eaves above. In winter, with everything frozen, they hold within themselves a thin, glittering line of ice that catches what little light there is and gives it back in faint silver gleams. Drips of melted snow have, in places, frozen into small icicles that hang from the lower edges of the arches like delicate glass pendants, perfectly still, perfectly transparent, holding within their small frozen forms a single trapped bubble of air or a tiny fleck of pale moss carried up from the gutter below. To look at one of these icicles closely is to look into a small frozen world entire, a miniature cathedral of crystal and stillness, and the brothers who walk past these tiny wonders many times a day in the slow course of their duties do sometimes pause and look at them, and smile a small private smile of quiet gratitude. The cloister breathes. It breathes the slow breath of all old places. And you breathe with it now, gently, gently, time with the patient hush of its falling snow. From the eastern walk of the cloister, where the snow drifts softly against the lower arches and the silver light pools upon the worn flagstones, a wide, low doorway opens into the body of the great church. The doorway itself is a thing of patient artistry. A deep arched opening framed by 3 concentric bands of carved stone, each band slightly recessed within the one before it, drawing the eye inward in a slow, gentle progression toward the deeper darkness beyond. The carvings upon these bands are old, very old, older perhaps than the rest of the church itself, salvaged long ago from some earlier, humbler sanctuary that once stood upon this very ground before the present walls were raised. Their forms are softened now by the long erasure of time, their original sharp lines blurred into something dreamlike and suggestive, the way certain memories soften when held too long within the warmth of a contemplative mind. You drift through that doorway now, slowly, slowly, and the cloister falls quietly behind you, and the great church opens itself before you, and the very first thing you become aware of is not the architecture, not the altar, not the long parallel rows of choir stalls, but the air. The air here is its own particular substance, distinct from any other air within the enclosure, distinct from any other air in the entire snowbound valley. It is colder than the air of the cloister walk, colder by several patient degrees, for the great vaulted space holds within itself the deep accumulated chill of all the winter nights it has endured, and no small fire could ever hope to warm so vast a hollow. But the cold here is a clean cold, a still cold, a reverent cold, the kind of cold that does not bite or sting but simply settles upon the skin like a soft grey mantle, slowing the breath, slowing the pulse, slowing the very thoughts within the mind, until they too become as patient as the stones. And the air carries within it the slow drifting fragrance of beeswax. That is the first scent the nose discovers, a soft golden sweetness rising from the great wax candles that burn upon the altar, and from the many smaller tapers set into iron candle stands along the side aisles. Beeswax in its pure, unadulterated form has a fragrance unlike any other substance in the medieval world, a fragrance that recalls summer meadows and lazy bees, and the slow heavy heat of a noonday sun upon clover blossoms, even when the wax itself burns in the bone-deep cold of a midwinter sanctuary. The brothers gather their wax themselves from the hives that drowse now beneath their straw winter coverings in the herb garden beyond the orchard, and the candles they make from this wax burn cleaner and longer and sweeter than any tallow could ever hope to do. The fragrance of those candles permeates the very fabric of the church, soaked deep into the stones, into the timbers of the choir stalls, into the old embroidered hangings behind the altar, until the building itself seems to exhale honey upon every breath. And beneath the beeswax, layered within it like the lower notes of a slow chord, runs the deeper fragrance of old incense, frankincense mostly, with a soft hint of myrrh, and perhaps a faint whisper of something more local, something the brothers have added themselves from the herbs of their own garden, a touch of dried lavender, a few crumbs of resin from the pine forest beyond the wall, a pinch of powdered juniper berry. The incense is not burning now, for the proper hour for its kindling has not yet come, but the memory of yesterday's incense lingers in the air, and the memory of the day before that, and the memory of every incense burning that has ever taken place within these walls across the long, unbroken procession of centuries, until the air itself has become a kind of incense, a kind of slow-living perfume that the church breathes out as gently as a sleeping child. Now your eyes adjust, the way they must always adjust within so deep a dimness, and the architecture of the great church begins to reveal itself to you in slow, patient stages. The nave stretches away before you, long and narrow and high, its floor laid with worn flagstones of pale grey limestone polished to a soft gleam by the long passage of countless feet. The walls on either side rise in tall, narrow piers of pale stone, and from these piers spring the great pointed arches that support the vault above. The vault itself is a thing of soaring beauty, ribbed in pale stone, its surface plastered between the ribs with a thin coating of lime wash that has gone the colour of old cream over the slow centuries, and in the gentle dimness it seems almost to float, hover above the nave like the inverted hull of some great patient ship, adrift upon the still waters of an underground sea. Along the north and south aisles the windows rise tall and slender, set deep within their stone embrasures. The glass within them is the old glass, the imperfect glass, the glass that was poured by hand into wide thin sheets and cut into small panes joined with thin leads. The light that filters through this glass on a winter morning is not the bright direct light of a summer noon. It is a soft filtered silver light broken into countless small irregular panes, each pane its own slightly different shade, some faintly greenish, some faintly bluish, some carrying within them the small wandering bubbles of trapped air that the medieval glassmakers could never quite eliminate from their craft. Where this light falls upon the pale stone floor, it lays down a delicate quilted pattern of softer and lighter tones, a pattern that drifts very slowly across the flagstones throughout the course of the day as the unseen sun makes its slow, shy passage behind the heavy clouds beyond the windows. In the windows of the eastern wall, behind the great altar at the far end of the nave, there is a little colour, not much, for this is a humble monastery and not a great cathedral, and the brothers cannot afford the lavish stained glass of the wealthy houses. But here and there, set into the pale leaded panes, are small medallions of coloured glass, a deep ruby red, a thoughtful sapphire blue, a warm amber gold, a soft mossy green. When the slow grey light passes through these small jewels, it falls upon the altar steps in soft tinted pools, and the brothers who climb those steps in the course of their duties pass through these pools of coloured light. Tanned for a brief gentle moment, their pale woolen habits are dappled with rose and gold and green and blue, as if the glass itself were quietly blessing them in colour as they pass. Down the long centre of the nave runs a wide aisle of polished flagstones, worn into shallow concave hollows by the slow procession of feet. To either side of this central aisle, set within the eastern half of the church, stand the great wooden choir stalls. They are made of old dark oak, blackened with age, and with the slow patient polishing of generations of woolen sleeves brushing against them. They face one another across the central aisle in two long parallel rows, and each stall has its own small carved canopy above and its own small hinged seat below, and beneath each hinged seat is a small wooden ledge called a misericorde, where a weary brother may rest his weight during the long hours of standing prayer without quite seeming to sit. A small kindness carved into the wood itself by the patient understanding of those who built these stalls long ago and knew very well indeed how heavy a long hour can become upon old knees. And the silence here is the deepest silence of all, silence that listens, silence that holds you, silence that breathes with you slowly into the long gentle hush of the falling snow. You drift now down the long-worn aisle of the nave, slowly, slowly, the way one moves within a room that holds a sleeping child, careful not to disturb the patient hush, careful not to break the soft listening attention of the stones themselves. Your imagined steps make no sound upon the polished flagstones, for in this place sound itself has been gentled into something almost spectral, and even the brothers, when they move here, move with a particular soft tread, their leather sandals barely whispering against the worn stone, their woolen habits making the smallest of dry rustlings as they pass. The nave stretches before you toward the distant east end, where the altar rises in its quiet dignity upon its 3 low steps of pale stone, and as you approach it, the great architecture of the church seems to gather itself around you, drawing inward, narrowing slightly, focusing the gentle attention of the entire building upon that single still point at its eastern heart. Before the altar rises a low screen of carved oak, the rood screen which divides the choir of the brothers from the nave where the layfolk and the few permitted visitors may stand. The screen is not high, no more than the height of a man's shoulder, and it is pierced through with delicate openings carved into the shapes of slender pointed arches and small interlocking circles, so that one may see through it without difficulty into the eastern sanctuary beyond. The wood of the screen is dark, very dark, almost black in the dim light, polished by the slow centuries of touch and by the patient application of beeswax and linseed oil, until it seems to absorb what little light falls upon it and to give back only the faintest gleam. Soft inner glow that suggests rather than reveals its careful craftsmanship. Above the screen, mounted upon a great oak beam that spans the full breadth of the nave, hangs the rood itself, the carved figure of the suffering Saviour, flanked by the small mourning figures of his mother and the beloved disciple. 3 of them rendered in the soft archaic style of an earlier century, their faces gentled by time, their painted colours faded into the muted tones of old parchment and dried rose petals. You pass through the small central opening of the screen, and now you're within the sanctuary proper, the inner heart of the church, the place reserved for the slow ceremonies of the offices and the quiet labours of the priest brothers. The floor here changes. Where the nave was paved in the pale grey limestone, the sanctuary floor is laid in patterned tiles of glazed earthenware, deep rich reds and warm honey golds and a soft mossy green, arranged into simple geometric designs of interlocking diamonds and small 4-petalled flowers. The tiles are old, much worn at the centre of the most travelled paths, with chips and small losses here and there at their edges. But the colours within them have a deep saturated quality that only the old earthen glazes possess, a richness that no later imitation has ever quite captured. To stand upon them is to stand upon a small remembered garden of patient colour, a garden that no winter can ever quite extinguish, even when the true gardens beyond the walls lie deep beneath the snow. The high altar rises at the eastern end of the sanctuary, set upon its 3 low steps. It is a simple altar by the standards of the great cathedrals, no more than a long, heavy block of pale stone, perhaps 8 feet in length and 4 feet in breadth, supported upon a solid base of the same stone. But the brothers have laboured long over its small adornments. The altar is draped in a fair linen cloth of pure undyed white, embroidered along its hanging edges with the slow patient stitchery of the brothers themselves, small designs of vines and grapes and ears of wheat, worked in pale silken threads of cream and ivory and the softest gold. The cloth hangs almost to the floor on the side facing the nave, and its hem stirs ever so faintly in the slow imperceptible draughts that move through every old stone building, even when no door has opened and no window has been unstopped. Upon the altar stand the few essential objects of the daily office. At the centre a small bronze cross, its surface darkened with age into the colour of old wine, its proportions modest, its workmanship plain. To either side of the cross, 2 great candlesticks of polished brass, each holding a thick beeswax candle of pale honey gold. The candles trimmed and wicked carefully each evening by the sacristan brother whose particular charge this is. The flames upon these candles burn now with the slow steady patience of well-tended flames, no flickering, no guttering, only that quiet upright light that beeswax gives when properly kept, a light the colour of warm cream poured into a brown earthenware bowl. Behind the cross, set against the back of the altar, stands a small reredos of carved wood, painted in the muted colours of the old style, depicting in 3 small panels the gentle scenes of the Annunciation, the Nativity, and the Adoration of the shepherds, their figures small and tender, their backgrounds touched here and there with the soft gleam of gold leaf laid down long ago by some patient brother whose name is no longer remembered, but whose careful hand still glows quietly in the candlelight every winter morning. Above the altar, Suspended from the high vault by 3 slender chains of dark iron hangs the sanctuary lamp. This is the small unsleeping flame, the one light within the church that is never permitted to go out, day or night, summer or winter, for as long as the church itself shall stand. The lamp is a small vessel of red glass, deep ruby in colour, set within an open framework of dark wrought iron, and within the glass burns a small wick floating upon a pool of pure olive oil. The flame within is small, no larger than a thumbnail, but it casts its soft red glow upward against the underside of the great vault and downward upon the white linen of the altar cloth, a small persistent presence that whispers to anyone who enters the sanctuary, even in the deepest hour of the longest winter night, that something here is awake, something here is watching, something here is keeping its slow, patient vigil while the rest of the world drifts in sleep. To the left of the altar, where the great church opens into the broad cross-arm of the northern transept, lie the small chantry chapels. There are 3 of them, each one tucked into its own arched recess in the thickness of the great wall, each one shielded from the main body of the church by a low wooden screen carved with delicate tracery. Each chapel has its own small altar, its own small pair of candlesticks, its own small painted panel set above the altar depicting the saint to whom that chapel is dedicated. The first is the chapel of St. Anne, Mother of the Virgin, and her painted figure shows her teaching her young daughter to read from a small book held open between them. The second is the chapel of St. Nicholas, patron of travellers and of the poor, and his panel shows him in his bishop's robes with 3 small children rising from a wooden tub beside him, gentle reminder of the old kindly legend. The third is the chapel of St. Cuthbert, the holy hermit of the cold northern coast, and his panel shows him kneeling in prayer upon a beach at dawn, with a small grey otter rising from the sea to warm his feet with its soft fur, the simple miracle that legend has long preserved. Each of these small chapels a single candle burns upon the altar, kept lit through the day by the sacristan, and the soft glow of those candles falls upon the painted faces of the saints, giving to their features a quiet living warmth. The brothers come here individually in the gaps between the great communal offices to kneel at the small altar of whichever saint speaks most gently to their own particular soul, to whisper their small private prayers. Leave behind for a moment the burdens that even a contemplative life cannot entirely shed, and the chapels listen, and the painted saints listen, and the small candles burn quietly on, and the slow honeyed fragrance of beeswax rises into the cold dim air of the great church, and the snow drifts on against the leaded windows, and the long quiet morning continues to unfold itself with the patience of all old kind things. Long before any pale hint of dawn has yet touched the eastern rim of the snowbound valley, long before the slow silver of first light has begun to gather behind the wooded hills, the dormitory of the brothers stirs into its gentle waking. The hour is somewhere in that deep middle stretch of the night that has no proper name in any language, the hour when the world outside is at its stillest, when even the wind has lain itself down to rest within the sheltering hollows of the snowdrifts, when the foxes in the distant forest have curled themselves into their burrows and the owls have ceased their soft low calling, and the whole great bowl of the valley breathes in that profound midnight hush which only those who have been awake within it could ever properly describe. It is somewhere within this deep quiet hour, perhaps 3 turns of the night candle past midnight, perhaps a little later, that the small bell in the cloister begins to ring. The bell that wakes the brothers is not the great bronze bell of the church tower, the one whose voice will later sing across the valley to summon the faithful of the surrounding farms to morning prayer. That great bell is reserved for the proper hour, the announcing hour, the public hour. The bell that wakes the brothers is something altogether more intimate, a small handbell of polished bronze with a clear sweet voice, no larger than a turnip, kept upon a small wooden stand in the cloister walk outside the dormitory door. The brother whose duty it is to wake the others, the circator he is called, rises somewhat earlier than his fellows from his own narrow bed and makes his way along the dim passage, with a single lit lantern in his careful hand. And when he reaches the foot of the dormitory stair, he lifts the small bell from its stand and rings it gently, gently, 3 slow soft chimes that drift up the stone stair into the long sleeping chamber above. The dormitory itself is a long, narrow room running the full length of the eastern range of the cloister, set upon the upper story directly above the chapter house. Its ceiling is a high open timber roof of dark oak rafters, and its walls are of plain pale stone, unadorned save for the small windows set high in the southern wall, narrow lancet windows now closed against the winter cold with shutters of dark planking. The floor is of broad oak boards, polished by the long passage of feet, and laid here and there with simple woven rush mats that take a little of the chill from the soles of bare or sandaled feet upon their first morning steps. Along both the eastern and western walls of the dormitory, set perpendicular to the wall like the teeth of a great wooden comb, run the long row of the brothers' bed, each one a simple low wooden frame with a straw-filled mattress and a single coarse linen sheet, and a heavy woolen blanket, and at the head a folded cloak that serves the brother both as pillow at night and as outer garment by day. Between each bed and the next stands a low wooden partition, no taller than the length of a man's arm, providing a small gentle measure of privacy without ever sealing one brother away from the soft-breathing presence of the others. At the foot of each bed sits a small wooden chest, rough-hewn and unornamented, in which each brother keeps the few small possessions permitted to him by the rule: a spare habit folded with care, a pair of woolen stockings, a small wooden comb, a worn book of psalms, perhaps a single private letter from a distant family member kept folded between the pages of the Psalter, perhaps a small carved wooden token brought long ago from home and never quite given up. Single oil lamp burns upon a small bracket at the far end of the dormitory, kept low through the night by the circator, casting only the faintest amber glow upon the long row of sleeping shapes beneath their dark blankets. Now, at the soft sound of the small bell drifting up the stair, the brothers begin to stir. They do not stir all at once. The waking happens in slow, gentle stages, the way the unfreezing of a small stream happens in early spring, first in one small place, then in another, then gradually all along its patient length. An older brother near the door, who has long ago trained himself to rise at the first soft note, sits up slowly upon the edge of his bed and begins to draw on his stockings in the dimness. Young novice further down the room turns beneath his blanket and groans the smallest of soft groans, the kind of groan that all young people have made upon all winter mornings since the very beginning of the world, and then sits up and rubs his eyes with the heels of both hands. Another brother, somewhere in the middle of the row, simply sighs once, a long, slow sigh, and then sits up and reaches for his sandals with the patient resignation of one who has done this exact thing on this exact dark morning for many decades, and will continue to do so for many more. The cold within the dormitory is real, but the brothers are accustomed to it, and they have small kindnesses prepared against it. Each brother sleeps in a long undergarment of soft undyed linen, and over this he draws on first his woolen tunic, then his scapular, then his outer habit, and finally his hooded cowl, all in a smooth, slow, practised sequence that long habit has rendered almost unconscious. The wool is rough but warm, and the layers taken together hold the body's slow accumulated warmth quite tenderly against the cold air of the chamber. Many of the brothers wear additionally a small woolen cap pulled down over the ears, especially in the deepest weeks of the winter, a small concession to comfort that the rule permits without comment. Few of the older brothers, those whose joints have begun to stiffen with the slow accumulation of years, wear also a pair of fingerless woolen mittens upon their hands during the long cold offices. The dressing happens in silence. Even the youngest novice, who would much prefer to whisper a small complaint to his nearest neighbour about the bitter early hour, does not do so. Silence is the rule of the dormitory, the deep silence of the great silence that runs from the conclusion of evening prayer until the morning chapter, and the brothers honour it carefully, communicating with one another only through the small gentle sign language that the order has slowly developed across the centuries. A raised hand here, a small gesture of fingers there, a soft nod, a quiet pointing toward a forgotten sandal beneath a neighbour's bed. The silence is not a cold silence. It is a warm silence, a companionable silence, the silence of people who know one another so well that words have become, in many small daily matters, entirely unnecessary. When each brother has dressed, he kneels for a moment beside his own bed, head bowed, hands folded, and offers the small private prayer with which the rule begins each day. Then he rises, and he draws the rough woolen blanket up over the straw mattress in a careful smoothing gesture, and he places his folded cloak neatly at the head of the bed, and he turns and walks slowly toward the small inner stair that leads down into the cloister walk. The brothers leave the dormitory one by one in a slow, patient procession, their cowls drawn up over their heads against the deeper cold of the unwarmed corridors, their breath rising in faint pale plumes upon the dim air of the lamplit stair. They descend the stair and they emerge into the cloister walk, and they turn northward toward the small night door that leads directly from the cloister into the great church, the door that has been built precisely for this purpose, so that the brothers need not pass into the open air upon their way to the night offices. The door swings open at the touch of the leading brother, and they pass through one by one into the deep, cold dimness of the church beyond. The sanctuary lamp glows softly in the distance, the small ruby flame keeping its patient vigil. The honey scent of beeswax drifts gently to meet them. The choir stalls wait in their long, quiet rows. And the brothers take their places, then they stand in silence. Then the long, slow rhythm of the monastic day begins again, exactly as it has begun on every other midwinter morning for many quiet centuries past. The brothers have taken their places now within the great choir stalls, each man stepping into his own particular place with the unhurried certainty of long practice, each man knowing the precise stall that belongs to him by ancient custom, the stall he has occupied for so many years that the wood beneath his hands has been worn into a faintly polished hollow by the slow accumulated touch of his own fingers across the slow accumulated mornings of his long monastic life. The stalls themselves rise on either side of the long central aisle of the choir, two facing rows of dark oak, their carved canopies arched above each occupant like small wooden hoods, their tall narrow backs polished smooth by the patient leaning of many shoulders, their misericords folded down now to provide the small kindly support that the long-standing offices require. The brothers stand in two long parallel rows, north choir facing south choir, the aisle between them a soft, dim corridor of pale flagstones lit only by the small flickering of the choir candles in their low iron stands. The candles for the office of Matins are arranged with careful intention. There are 4 great wax candles upon the choir lectern at the centre of the aisle, set into a tall iron candlestand of 4 arms, and these provide the principal light by which the precentor and the cantor and the readers will see their books. Smaller individual candles, no thicker than a man's thumb, stand in small wooden holders set into the front edge of each choir stall, 1 candle for every 2 brothers, so that each pair may share its light upon the open page of the great choir book. The candle flames are still and tall and patient, for there is almost no movement of air within the deep stone chamber, and the small flames burn with that perfectly upright stillness that beeswax always achieves in a sheltered space, casting their soft amber pools upward upon the lined faces of the brothers and downward upon the worn pages of the books before them. The light of these many small candles gathered together within the long dark hollow of the choir creates a particular and unmistakable atmosphere. It is not a bright light. It is not even what a modern eye would call adequate light. It is a light that has been calibrated by many quiet centuries of practice to reveal only what is necessary and to leave gently shadowed everything that does not require seeing. The faces of the brothers are softly lit from below, the candles set just at the level of their hands, so that their cheekbones catch the warm glow while the deeper hollows of their eyes remain in shadow beneath their drawn cowls. The carved canopies above each stall are touched here and there with small spots of golden light upon their upper surfaces, but the deeper recesses of the woodwork retreat into the soft brown darkness of unlit oak. The stone vault high above is altogether lost in shadow. One looks up from the choir and sees only a great patient darkness where the ribs of the vault dissolve into the deeper darkness of the night above the church, and somewhere within that high darkness the small ruby gleam of the sanctuary lamp burns on alone. Tits flame so small at this distance that it seems almost to be a single distant star caught beneath the roof. Now the precentor, the brother whose particular charge is the music of the offices, lifts his head and gives the smallest of soft signals, a quiet inclination of the chin, almost imperceptible to anyone not trained to watch for it. And in response to that small signal, the long quiet of Matins begins. It begins, as the office has always begun, with a single voice. The precentor himself, or perhaps the cantor of the night if the precentor has assigned the office to him, opens his mouth and speaks the first soft words of the opening verse, half spoken and half sung, in the slow, unhurried cadence of the old plain song. The voice is not raised, the voice does not declaim. The voice is soft, deep, almost conversational in its volume, but it carries within itself that particular timbre of a voice that has been formed by many years of singing within stone vaults. Voice that knows precisely how to release each note so that the stones themselves will lift it and pass it gently along the length of the church until the smallest sung syllable drifts at last into the furthest corner of the western nave. The brothers respond. Their voices rise together in the long flowing line of the answering verse, all of them as one, their many separate voices folded into a single quiet stream of sound, the way many small rivulets fold themselves into the slow patient current of a single winter stream. The plain song of the medieval offices has no harmony as we now understand the word. It is monophonic, a single melodic line sung in unison by every voice. But the unison itself is the miracle, for each brother brings to the line his own slight individual colour, his own slight particular timbre, and these many small individual qualities blend together into a single complex tone that no solo voice could ever achieve. The young novices add the bright, clear top of the sound. The middle-aged brothers add the warm, full body of it. The elder brothers, whose voices have gentled over the slow decades into something softer and more burnished, add the deep, low foundation upon which the whole quiet edifice rests. The melody itself drifts forward in the slow, unhurried way of the old chant. It does not rush, it does not climb dramatically, it does not fall in great expressive cascades. It moves in small patient steps, mostly by single tones and half tones, rising a little, falling a little, lingering upon certain words, hurrying gently across certain others. The shape of each phrase follows the natural shape of the Latin text, the long syllables given more breath, the short syllables passing more lightly. Whole verses unfold in this slow, undulating manner, like a long ribbon of dark silk drawn slowly through still water, and at the end of each verse there is a small breath, a small pause, a small gathering of attention before the next verse begins. The texts are the psalms, always the psalms, in the long unbroken sequence that the monastic week prescribes. The brothers will sing through the entire psalter in the course of a single week, all 150 psalms, distributed across the 8 daily offices and the longer night office of Matins, and they have done so for so many years that the words themselves have become engraved upon their memories more deeply than any inscription could ever be carved into stone. Most of them no longer need to look at their books at all, and they do so only out of long habit, or out of reverence for the physical object of the great choir book, or out of the small quiet pleasure of seeing the familiar words rise up to meet them in the candlelight, page after slow page, verse after slow verse. Between the psalms come the readings. A single brother designated for the night rises from his stall and walks slowly to the lectern at the centre of the aisle. He bows toward the altar. He opens the great book of homilies upon the lectern. He clears his throat softly, almost apologetically, and begins to read. The reading is from the writings of one of the old fathers of the church, a passage chosen carefully by the precentor for its appropriateness to the season. The voice of the reader is steady and unhurried, and the brothers listen motionless in their stalls, their cowls drawn forward over their heads, their hands folded into the long sleeves of their habits for warmth. The reading drifts across the cold, dim air, and the candles flicker very slightly, and somewhere far above in the dark vault a single moth, drowsy with the cold but drawn to the light, traces a slow, uncertain spiral around one of the lectern flames before retreating again into the darkness. A small fragment of falling wax curls itself away from the side of one candle and slides down its surface in a thin, pale ribbon, hardening before it can reach the candle holder beneath. A brother in the third stall of the south choir shifts his weight very gently from one foot to the other, the small sound lost entirely beneath the reader's voice. The night is long, the office is long, The cold is patient, and the brothers stand within it all, gentle as snow as the long, slow plain-song drifts on toward the far, still hour of the dawn. The long office of Matins draws at last toward its quiet close. The final psalm has been sung, the final reading has been offered, the final gentle response has drifted into the patient silence of the great vault above. The precentor speaks the closing collect in his low, unhurried voice, and the brothers reply with their soft murmured Amen, and a small still pause settles itself upon the choir, the kind of pause that is itself a kind of prayer, the kind of pause in which the air seems to gather around the candles and hold its breath for a moment before letting it slowly out again. The precentor inclines his head toward the altar. The brothers incline their heads, the candles flicker very slightly in the small disturbance of so many cowled figures bowing as one. And then, with the unhurried grace of long practice, the brothers begin to file out from their stalls. They move in a slow, patient procession, the south choir leading, the north choir following, all of them passing 2 by 2 through the small night door that gives back into the cloister walk. The leading brother carries with him a small lantern of horn and iron, its single candle softly glowing within, and the others walk behind him in the dimness, their cowls drawn forward, their hands folded into the long sleeves of their habits, their leather sandals making the smallest of soft whispers against the worn flagstones. The cloister walk is colder now than it was when they passed through it before Matins, for the deep heart of the night has settled itself upon the valley while they were singing, and the air within the covered ambulatory has taken on that particular still cold that arrives in the small hours when the world is most thoroughly asleep. They climbed the small stone stair to the dormitory, slowly, slowly, the eldest brothers placing each foot with the careful deliberation that age has taught them, the youngest brothers waiting patiently behind, never crowding, never hurrying, for the rule does not permit any haste in the corridors that lie between the offices. They emerge into the long quiet chamber of the dormitory where the single small lamp at the far end still burns its patient amber flame, and they make their way to their own beds, each brother finding his place by the gentle memory of habit even in the dim half-darkness. They do not undress fully, for the second sleep of the night is short, and they will be rising again within a few hours for the office of lauds at the first softening of the eastern sky. But they remove their outer habits and fold them carefully over the wooden chests at the foot of each bed, and they slip beneath their woolen blankets in only their tunics and stockings, and they draw the covers up to their chins. Then they let their slow breathing settle once more into the rhythm of sleep. Sleep comes quickly, for the night office has a way of weighting the eyelids with a particular gentle heaviness, and the long standing in the cold has tired the body in that pleasant way that makes the warmth of a straw mattress feel like the deepest of soft kindnesses. Within the space of perhaps a slow counting of 50 breaths, the dormitory has settled into the quiet collective rhythm of 50 brothers asleep again. The slow soft rising and falling of 50 small breaths, the occasional gentle shifting of a sleeper turning beneath his blanket, the very faint creak of a wooden bed frame as some brother readjusts his weight upon his straw-filled mattress. Outside, beyond the shuttered windows, the snow has begun to fall again. A slow, soft second snowfall settling itself upon the first, deepening the already deep quiet of the valley, building the white drifts a little higher against the lower walls of the church, smoothing once more the small bird tracks that the morning robin had left across one corner of the garth. The hours pass, the candle at the far end of the dormitory burns slowly down, its wax descending in soft golden tears along its sides, its flame growing very faintly smaller as the night deepens. The circator brother, whose duty does not entirely cease even during the second sleep, walks once or twice along the slow length of the dormitory in the dimness, his lantern held low, his sandaled feet silent upon the rush mats, simply checking that all is well, that no brother has fallen ill in the night, that no candle has tipped from its bracket, that no small flame has caught upon any unintended thing. He pauses for a moment beside one of the elder brothers whose breathing has been laboured in recent days, listens for a slow, careful moment to the quiet rise and fall of that breath, satisfies himself that it is the breath of healthy sleep and not of some deeper distress, and then continues on his slow rounds. The dormitory holds him within its quiet trust, and he holds it within his quiet care, and the two of them together hold the long sleeping silence of the night. Outside, the eastern sky begins very slowly to soften. There is no dawn yet, not properly, but the deep velvet blackness of the deepest night begins to thin into a deep blue, the kind of blue that lives only in the half hour before the true beginning of light. The snow clouds have moved on, drifted southward in the night, leaving behind a clear sky in which a few small stars still burn faintly, growing dimmer with every passing breath. The eastern hills begin to draw themselves out from the darkness, becoming first a deeper blackness against a softer blackness, then a faint silhouette, then a low distinct ridge against the slowly bluing sky. Single early bird, perhaps a robin, perhaps a small wren stirring in the thicket beneath the orchard wall, lets out a single soft tentative chirp, the first small voice of the not yet arrived morning, and then falls silent again, as if uncertain whether the proper hour has come. It is at this hour, this softest of waking hours, that the small bell rings again. Once more it is the gentle handbell in the cloister walk, and once more the circator lifts it carefully from its stand and rings the 3 slow soft chimes that drift up the stone stair. The waking now is gentler than the waking for Matins, for the brothers have just come from their second sleep refreshed, and the approach of dawn carries within it a soft natural readiness for rising that the deep middle hour of the night could never quite provide. The brothers stir, sit up, draw on their habits with the same patient practiced sequence as before, kneel briefly beside their beds, smooth their blankets, and file once more down the stair, through the cloister walk, through the small night door into the great church. But the church now is different. The light has begun to change. The eastern windows behind the altar, which had been simple dark rectangles during the long matins, now carry within their leaded panes the very faintest hint of a deep blue dawn. The colours are still mostly in the darkness, but here and there the small medallions of stained glass have begun to gather to themselves the first whispers of light, the deep ruby of one, the thoughtful sapphire of another, beginning to glow ever so faintly with the slow approaching morning. The candles upon the altar still burn, but their flames now seem a little softer, a little gentler, as if they are preparing themselves to give way courteously to the greater light that is coming. The office of Lords is the office of dawn, the morning praise, and its character is altogether different from the deep contemplative office of Matins, where Matins was long and slow and inward, full of the dark patience of the night psalms. Lords is shorter, brighter, gentler, full of the morning psalms that speak of light and waking and the renewal of the earth. The plain song of Lords is set to the slightly more open melodies that the old chant tradition has reserved for this hour, melodies that climb a little more freely, that rest upon brighter notes, that carry within themselves the soft, glad recognition of a new day arriving. The brothers sing these morning psalms with voices that are themselves a little brighter now than they were in the deep night, voices that have been freshened by sleep and warmed by movement and gentled by the patient knowledge that the long darkness is yielding once again to the slow returning light. By the time the office is concluded, the eastern windows have brightened just enough for the smallest pools of pale dawn to reach the altar steps, and the candles are extinguished one by the sacristan. The brothers file out 2 by 2 into the cloister walk, and the new day, the long, slow winter day, has gently and quietly begun. The brothers emerge from the great church through the southern door, the day door, the door that opens directly onto the eastern walk of the cloister, and the cold of the unwarmed corridors meets them once again with its patient, quiet pressure. Their breath rises now in faint pale plumes upon the dim morning air, and the light in the cloister walk has shifted just enough that one can begin faintly to make out the colours of things, the soft brown of the worn flagstones, the pale grey of the stone columns, the deep undyed wool of the brothers' habits, all of them muted still, all of them held in the tender half-tones of a winter dawn that has only just begun. The sky above the open garth has lightened from the deep blue of the small hours into a pale silvered grey, and although the sun itself has not yet risen above the eastern wood, the snow within the garth has begun to glow with that particular soft inner luminescence that only fresh untrodden snow possesses in the first slow hour of morning. The brothers do not return to the dormitory now, nor do they yet disperse to their separate labours. The rule of the order permits, in the depths of winter, a small kindly accommodation between the office of lords and the more demanding work of the morning, a brief gentle pause known as the time of the mixtum, small frugal breaking of the long night fast taken in the warming room before the more substantial business of the day begins. And it is to the warming room, the kale factory as the older brothers still sometimes call it, that the procession now slowly turns. The warming room lies along the southern range of the cloister, set conveniently between the refectory and the chapter house, and it is the only chamber within the entire enclosure, apart from the kitchen and the infirmary, that is permitted to keep a continuously burning fire throughout the long winter months. This is not a small consideration. In the bitter weeks of January and February, when the cold within the stone buildings sinks so deep into the masonry that even the great church seems carved from a single block of solid frost, the warming room becomes a kind of small quiet sanctuary of warmth, place to which the brothers are permitted to retreat at certain prescribed hours to thaw their numbed fingers and ease the slow stiffness that the cold brings into the joints of even the youngest among them. You drift now with the brothers along the southern walk past the small arched doorway that opens into the chapter house, and on toward the slightly larger doorway just beyond it, which gives directly into the warming room itself. The door is heavy, made of dark planking bound with iron straps, and it has been weighted with a small iron counterweight upon a chain, so that it will swing closed of its own accord behind anyone passing through. Small kindly arrangement designed to keep the precious warmth from escaping into the colder corridors beyond. The leading brother pushes the door gently open, and you pass through with him, and the door whispers slowly shut behind you with the soft heavy sound of weighted iron and the gentle sigh of warm air meeting cold. And the warmth is the first thing you notice. It is not a great roaring warmth, not the lavish heat of some grand baronial hall, but a soft, persistent, gathered warmth that the room has been quietly accumulating since long before dawn, warmth that settles itself upon the cheeks and the hands and the chest like a soft woolen shawl draped slowly over chilled shoulders. The cold does not immediately depart from the body, for the body has been holding it for many hours now, but the cold begins almost at once to relax its grip, to soften, to recede slowly toward the surface of the skin, and from there outward into the kind embrace of the warm air. The brothers as they enter seem each to release the smallest of soft sighs, an involuntary acknowledgment of comfort, the sigh that a tired traveller gives upon stepping at last into a sheltered inn after a long cold journey through a winter wood. The warming room itself is rectangular, somewhat broader than it is long, with a flagged floor of pale stone that has been worn smooth by many slow centuries of feet. Along the southern wall, set into a great stone arch, stands the open hearth, the heart and reason of the entire chamber. The hearth is large, far larger than any other in the enclosure save the kitchen, with a deep bed of stone hearthstones set into the floor and a wide mouth opening into the chimney above. Within the hearth burns a slow, careful fire, well tended, well laid, the kind of fire that knows precisely how to hold its heat without ever flaring into wastefulness. It is a fire of seasoned oak logs, the wood cut from the enclosure's own woodland the previous summer, and stacked carefully under the wood shelter to dry across the autumn months, so that by the time it reaches the hearth it has lost nearly all of its damp and burns, with a slow, steady glow that produces much heat and very little smoke. The flames within are not the bright, tall flames of a freshly kindled fire, but the deeper, richer flames of a fire that has been burning long, low orange and amber, and the deep red of well-established embers, dancing gently upon the surface of the great glowing logs at their base. Above the hearth, suspended from an iron crane that swings out into the room when needed, hangs a great copper kettle blackened upon its underside with the soot of many seasons, polished to a soft warm gleam upon its upper surface. The kettle is full of water drawn that morning from the cloister well, and it sings a soft thin singing now as the water within it approaches the boil, a small high note hovering just at the edge of hearing, mingling with the gentle crackling of the fire and the slow occasional collapse of an ember falling deeper into the glowing bed beneath. Beside the hearth set upon a low wooden stool, stands a small wooden tray bearing the simple supplies of the mixtum, a small earthenware jar of dried herbs for the tisane, a wooden bowl of coarse ground breadcrumbs, a small crock of honey from the enclosure's own beehives, and a stack of plain wooden cups in which the morning drink will be served. The room contains also other furnishings, simple, modest, but carefully arranged for the comfort of the brothers. Along both the eastern and the western walls run long, low wooden benches polished by the slow patient seating of many bodies, and before each bench stands a long, narrow trestle table of dark oak, set up that morning for the mixtum and to be cleared away again after it. Upon the tables lie folded squares of plain undyed linen serving as the modest tablecloths, and upon these in turn are arranged the small wooden trenchers that will receive the brothers' simple portions. At intervals along the centre of each table stand small earthenware oil lamps, their wicks burning soft amber, providing the modest additional light that this dimmer southern room requires, even at the late hour of dawn. The brothers now take their places upon the benches, in the same order in which they sit at the longer tables of the refectory, the elder brothers nearer the head, the younger brothers and the novices nearer the foot, the abbot in the small carved chair at the central head where the two long tables nearly meet. The cellarer brother, who has charge of the morning provisions, has already laid out upon each trencher the small frugal portion that the rule allows, a single thick slice of the dark, coarse rye bread baked yesterday in the great bakehouse oven, a small pale morsel of hard sheep's cheese, and a few withered apples cut into thin slices and arranged with a touch of quiet care. It is not much, by any measure. It is not meant to be much. The mixtum is not a meal in the proper sense, but only a small bridge across the long gap between the breaking of the fast and the more substantial dinner that will come at the proper midday hour. Young brother now lifts the great copper kettle carefully from its iron crane, swinging the long handle aside, and carries it slowly along the row of brothers, pouring into each wooden cup a small measure of the steaming herbal tisane, sage and thyme, and a little dried hyssop, sweetened ever so slightly with a small spoonful of the enclosure's own pale honey. The fragrance of the warm herbs rises gently through the room, mingling with the soft smoke of the hearth and the patient amber of the oil lamps, and the brothers wrap their cold fingers around the warm wooden cups and bow their heads as the abbot speaks the soft brief grace, and then, the kindly silence that the rule prescribes for the mixtum, they begin slowly, gratefully, peaceably to eat. The mixtum draws to its quiet close in the gentle warmth of the calefactory, and the brothers rise from the long benches with the small soft sounds of wooden cups being set down upon wooden trenchers, the faint whisper of woolen habits brushing against polished oak, the slow shuffling of sandalled feet upon the worn flagstones. The cellarer brother and his two appointed assistants begin at once the patient business of clearing the tables, gathering the small wooden cups, brushing the few stray crumbs into a wooden bowl, folding the simple linen cloths along their familiar creases. The remaining brothers file slowly out through the heavy weighted door, back into the cooler air of the cloister walk, their breath rising once more in faint pale plumes upon the morning air, their cheeks still warmed by the lingering glow of the hearth. The eastern sky beyond the arches of the cloister has brightened a shade further now, into the soft pearl grey of a true winter morning, and the snow within the open garth seems to glow with the same patient luminescence as a sheet of fine vellum held up against a window. They do not go far. The chapter house lies only a few paces along the southern walk, its arched doorway opening directly off the cloister between the warming room and the slight passage that leads outward toward the cemetery and the gardens. The chapter house is, by long monastic tradition, the meeting place where the brothers gather each morning to hear the daily reading of the rule, to hear any necessary announcements, to confess any small faults that the rule requires them to bring before the community, and to receive from the abbot the gentle ordering of the day's labours. It is a chamber of considerable importance within the life of the enclosure, second only to the great church itself in the slow ceremony of monastic existence, and its architecture has been shaped to honour this importance. The doorway into the chapter house is broad and low, framed by 3 concentric arches of pale carved stone, the outer arch resting upon slender clustered columns whose capitals have been carved into the gentle shapes of unfolding leaves. To either side of the main doorway, set within the same wall, are 2 smaller arched openings, glazed with the same imperfect leaded panes as the church windows, allowing those brothers who cannot quite fit within the chapter house itself on great feast days to stand within the cloister walk and still hear the proceedings within. But on this ordinary winter morning the chamber is more than ample for the modest community, and the brothers pass through the central doorway in their slow, patient procession, ducking their heads slightly beneath the low arch, and emerge into the dim, quiet space within. The chapter house is roughly square in plan, with a low-ribbed vault of pale stone supported upon a single, slender central column. The column itself is a small marvel of careful workmanship, slim and graceful, its base resting upon a low octagonal plinth of darker stone, its capital carved into a gentle ring of stylized acanthus leaves, from which the 8 ribs of the vault spring outward in graceful curves to meet the corresponding corbels set into the surrounding walls. The vault thus formed has the quality of a small upturned flower, its ribs, the gentle veins of its petals, and the eye is drawn upward toward this central blossoming whenever it lifts itself from the more ordinary business of the floor. The walls of the chapter house are plain and undecorated, plastered in the same thin pale lime wash as the church vault, the colour of old cream with the faintest hint of warm grey beneath. Along 3 of these walls, the eastern, the northern and the southern, runs a continuous low stone bench built directly into the masonry itself, providing seating for the brothers during the chapter meeting. The bench is worn into shallow, soft hollows by the long centuries of patient sitting, and its edges have been polished to a faint gleam by the slow brushing of countless woolen habits. Upon the bench in some places lie small folded squares of woven rush matting, kindly placed there by the elder brothers themselves, who have learned across the years that the cold of the stone bites more sharply through a woolen habit on a winter morning than the rule alone can quite accommodate. The 4th wall, the western wall in which the entrance doorway is set, is the only one without seating, but it bears upon either side of the doorway a small wooden lectern, one for the brother who reads the daily portion of the rule, and one for the brother who reads any announcements or letters that may have arrived in the previous days. Above each lectern is mounted a small iron bracket holding a single oil lamp, lit now in the dim morning hour, casting its modest amber pool upon the open page below. At the eastern end of the chamber, set centrally upon the low stone bench, stands the abbot's seat. It is not a throne, it is not even a particularly elaborate chair. It is a simple wooden seat with a slightly raised back and modestly carved arms, its wood polished by long use, its cushion a single folded square of the same coarse undyed wool from which the brothers' habits are made. The abbot sits within this seat with the same humility with which he occupies every other place in the enclosure, for the rule reminds him that he is a brother first and a father only second, and that the abbot's chair is simply the place from which his particular service to the community is rendered, no more and no less. The brothers now take their places upon the long stone bench, the elder brothers nearer the abbot's seat, the younger brothers and the novices ranged outward along the bench in a slow, gentle gradient of seniority, all of them settling themselves with the small, soft sounds of woolen habits adjusting upon stone, of leather sandals shifting upon worn flagstones, of careful breath drawn quietly in and quietly out. Once all are seated, a moment of slow silence settles upon the chamber, the kind of silence that gathers before any beginning, the kind of silence in which the small sounds of the building itself become audible, the faint creak of an old timber rafter contracting in the cold above the vault, the soft hiss of an oil lamp wick adjusting itself within its small reservoir of olive oil, the distant muffled cooing of a single dove somewhere beyond the walls, drifting in faintly from the snow-blanketed orchard. The abbot now rises from his seat and speaks the small, soft opening verse with which the chapter has begun every morning since the foundation of the order. The brothers respond in their soft murmured unison. The abbot resumes his seat, and the brother whose appointed turn it is to read the rule that day rises from the bench, walks slowly to the lectern at the western wall, bows toward the abbot, and opens the great book of the rule upon the polished sloping surface. The book itself is a thing of patient beauty. It is a large volume bound in dark calfskin, much darkened by the slow years, its spine reinforced with thin strips of pale parchment, its corners protected by small triangular plates of polished brass. The pages within are of fine vellum, the writing upon them rendered in the careful round hand of some long-deceased brother whose name is no longer remembered but whose patient labour has provided the daily reading of this house for many quiet generations. The first letter of each chapter is illuminated with a small modest decoration in red and blue ink, and here and there a tiny figure has been worked into the foliage of the borders. A small scribe at his desk, a small bird with a worm in its beak, small hair looking back over its shoulder as it leaps across a margin. The reader clears his throat softly, almost apologetically, and begins. His voice is quiet, unhurried, pitched at the level of comfortable conversation, for the chamber is small enough that no raising of the voice is required. The portion appointed for this day deals with the proper conduct of the brothers in the kitchen during their week of cooking service, and the words of the old rule fall gently upon the listening community, words that they have heard so many times before that each of them has become a kind of familiar friend. The reader pauses at the close of the chapter. The brothers bow their heads. The abbot speaks the brief, gentle commentary that custom permits him, no more than a few quiet sentences, drawing some small, soft application from the day's reading to the present circumstances of the house. Then, in the slow, patient sequence that the rule prescribes, the abbot turns his attention to the ordering of the day's labours. He speaks the names of certain brothers, gives them their assignments for the morning hours, the brewing room, the bakery, the scriptorium, the woodshed, the infirmary, the snow clearing of the southern path. Each brother bows his head in quiet acknowledgment as his name is spoken. The abbot finishes, the chapter draws to its slow close, and the brothers rise and bow once more and file out into the cloister walk to begin, each in his own way, the long patient labours of the winter morning. You drift now with a small group of the brothers along the eastern walk of the cloister, past the night door of the church, past the small arched opening that gives into the slight passage, until you come at last to a narrow stair set into the thickness of the wall, stair that climbs upward into the second story of the eastern range. The brothers ascend slowly, their woolen habits gathering small cold draughts about their ankles, their breath rising in pale plumes upon the dim stairwell air. At the head of the stair, a low arched doorway opens into the scriptorium, the patient quiet workshop of the written word, the room in which the ancient knowledge of the world is preserved and copied and gently transmitted across the slow generations of the order. The scriptorium is a long narrow chamber, set above the chapter house and opening directly upon the cloister beneath. Its principal feature is a long row of tall lancet windows along the eastern wall set deep into the thickness of the masonry, each window glazed with the same imperfect leaded panes as the church windows below. These windows are the lifeblood of the scriptorium, for the work of the scribe requires good light above all things, and the brothers have arranged their writing desks with careful intention to make the most of every patient hour of winter daylight that the eastern wall can offer them. In summer, the work begins early and continues late, and the scriptorium hums with quiet industry from before prime until after vespers. But in winter, when the sun rises late and sets early and the days are short and the light is thin, the work of the scriptorium is necessarily abbreviated, confined to those few precious hours in the middle of the day when the soft pearl light is strong enough to read and write by. The desks themselves stand in two long parallel rows along the chamber, perpendicular to the eastern windows, so that each scribe sits with the window on his left hand and the inner wall of the chamber on his right, allowing the available light to fall directly upon the page from over his left shoulder, the angle that the medieval craft has long understood to be the most useful for the patient work of the pen. Each desk is a sloping wooden writing surface set upon two slender wooden trestles, the slope rising at a gentle angle from front to back, providing the scribe with a comfortable working position that allows the parchment to lie flat without sliding while the pen approaches it from above. The desks are not large, no more than the breadth of two open hands, and the length of a forearm and a hand, but each one is a small, carefully ordered world, with its own small, shallow tray for pens and quills, its own small pot of ink set into a dedicated hollow, own small leather pad for resting the heel of the writing hand. Upon each desk this morning lies the work in progress of its particular scribe. At the first desk nearest the door lies the great half-completed psalter that the senior scribe has been labouring upon for the past 3 years. Its pages of fine pale vellum stacked carefully in their proper order beneath a small leather weight, its current open page bearing the soft black lines of finely ruled writing guides drawn in lead point and the patient first letters of the morning's intended work. At the second desk lies a smaller, modest volume, a copy of the rule itself, being made for a younger sister house that has recently been founded and has need of its own copy of the foundational text. At the third desk lies a slim choir of antiphons, the music written upon the page in the 4-lined staff of the old chant notation, each note drawn carefully as a small dark square or a small dark diamond depending upon its rhythmic value. The brothers who work within the scriptorium are a small select group, chosen for the patience of their hands and the steadiness of their eyes and the quiet temperament that the long hours of writing require. There are perhaps 6 or 7 of them today, a number that varies with the season and with the particular labours that the abbot has assigned. Each of them has already donned over his ordinary woolen habit a small additional outer garment, a kind of short woolen overshirt with sleeves cut wide and short to keep the cuffs of the habit clear of the inkpot. For an ink stain upon a habit is a sorrow that the patient washing of the laundry brother can never quite remove. They have also each removed their outer cowls and folded them neatly upon a small wooden bench by the door, for the cowl when drawn forward over the head obstructs the careful peripheral vision that the scribe requires upon his page. The cold within the scriptorium is real, and the cold is the great enemy of the scribe in the winter months. There is no fire here, for fire and parchment and ink and the long accumulated labours of many years cannot safely share a single chamber, and the brothers have long ago accepted that the scriptorium in winter is simply a cold room and must be endured as such. But they have small kindnesses prepared against the cold. Beneath each desk rests a small earthenware foot-warmer, a low flat vessel of glazed clay filled with hot embers carefully gathered from the calefactory hearth that morning and covered with a thin perforated lid providing a small persistent warmth to the soles of the cold-sandaled feet. Upon each desk, set just beside the ink-pot, stands a small oil lamp burning a slow flame of pure olive oil, its purpose less to give light, for the windows provide that, than to give a small careful warmth to the ink-pot itself, for ink in winter has a bitter habit of freezing within its pot, and a frozen ink-pot is the ruin of a scribe's morning. You may pause for a long quiet moment beside the desk of the senior scribe, an elder brother whose name within the house is Brother Matthias, though no name is needed for the gentle observation of his work. He is perhaps 60 years of age, his hair entirely silver now where the tonsure has not removed it, his beard close trimmed and the colour of polished pewter. His face has the patient, lined gentleness of a man who has spent his life in slow, careful labour, and his eyes, though weakened slightly by the long years of close work, are clear and kind and intent upon the page before him. His hands are the hands of a scribe, slender, long-fingered, slightly stained at the tips with the faint dark traces of ink that no scrubbing can quite remove, the small permanent badge of his patient calling. His method is unhurried in the deepest sense. He does not rush, he does not strain, he approaches each letter with the same calm, careful attention that he gave to the very first letter of his very first day, as a young novice in this same scriptorium more than 40 years ago. He dips the tip of his quill pen into the small pot of ink, lifting it out with the same practised movement of the wrist that allows the excess ink to flow back into the pot rather than dropping in a careless blot upon the page. He brings the pen to the parchment and begins the first downstroke of the next letter in the line of text he is copying. His hand moves slowly, smoothly, with the small deliberate adjustments that the formation of each letter requires. The pen makes the smallest of dry whispers against the surface of the vellum, a sound almost too small to be heard, the sound of a single dry leaf being gently drawn across a smooth wooden floor. The letter takes shape upon the page. It is a small, graceful capital letter, perhaps the opening of a new verse, drawn in a fine sure hand that has been refined across the slow decades into something almost effortless in its quiet precision. When the letter is complete, Brother Matthias lifts his pen from the page, sets it carefully upon the small wooden rest beside the ink pot, takes up a small piece of soft cloth, and dabs gently at the still wet ink to ensure it will dry evenly and without smudging. He pauses, he looks at the letter. He is satisfied. He takes up the pen again. He continues. Beside him on the desk lies the exemplar, the source manuscript from which he is copying, an older volume opened to the corresponding page, weighted gently at its corners with small, smooth river stones to keep it from closing while he works. He glances from exemplar to copy and back again, the slow, patient rhythm of comparison that has shaped the entire literate tradition of the medieval world. A word is checked, a letter is verified, a small mark of punctuation is faithfully preserved. The text passes from the older page to the new page, from one century to the next, from one quiet hand to another, in the slow, patient stream of preservation that has carried the wisdom of the ancient world across the long centuries of the Christian era. The morning passes. The light shifts very slowly across the long row of desks. The pens whisper. The pages slowly fill, and the scriptorium holds its quiet vigil against the long forgetting that would otherwise descend upon the world. You drift now away from the scriptorium and back down the narrow stair, returning to the eastern walk of the cloister where the soft morning light has continued its slow patient brightening upon the snow within the open garth. From here a small covered passage runs westward along the southern range, past the chapter house and the warming room, and on toward the great refectory at the far western end. But before reaching the refectory itself, the passage opens upon another doorway, broader than the others, somewhat lower, with a heavier oak door bound in iron straps and worn smooth at its lower half by the constant passage of many sandaled feet. This is the door to the kitchen, and you may pass through it now gently into the warm, fragrant heart of the enclosure's daily nourishment. The kitchen is a substantial chamber, considerably larger than one might expect for a community of such modest scale, for the rule of the order requires that the brothers be fed simply but adequately, and the patient preparation of even the simplest meal for 50 mouths requires room to move, room to chop, room to stir, room to bake. The ceiling above is high, opening upward into a great broad chimney that rises through the roof in a tall stone shaft, drawing the smoke of the cooking fires upward and out into the pale winter sky beyond. The walls of the chamber are of bare stone, blackened in places by the slow patient soot of many centuries of cooking, and the floor is paved in broad flagstones worn into shallow, soft hollows along the most frequented paths between the hearth, the bread oven, the central work table, and the broad stone trough where the dishes are washed. The principal feature of the kitchen is the great cooking hearth that occupies almost the entire eastern wall. It is far larger than the modest hearth of the calefactory, deep enough that a tall man could stand upright within it without bending his head, broad enough that 3 great cooking pots may be set side by side over its glowing bed of embers. The hearth opens beneath a wide stone arch, and from the upper corners of this arch hang 2 long iron cranes that may be swung outward into the room when needed, each one capable of bearing the considerable weight of the largest cooking pots. Above the hearth itself, set into the chimney shaft, hangs an array of iron hooks and bars from which depend in patient suspension a great variety of cooking implements, long ladles of polished oak, copper skimming spoons blackened by use, iron flesh hooks, wooden spurtles, a great brass colander, long-handled iron pan for the toasting of grains. Upon the hearth this morning burns a slow, careful fire, larger than that of the calefactory but no more wasteful, fire of split oak and beech that has been kindled before dawn by the Kitchener brother, and has been settling itself for hours now into the deep glowing bed of embers that the slow cooking of the day's meal requires. The flames within are low and patient, dancing in soft amber and orange tongues across the surface of the great logs, casting their warm, rich light upon the surrounding stones, and upon the faces of the brothers who labour nearby. The heat from the hearth fills the entire kitchen with a soft, persistent warmth that is almost startling after the cold of the cloister walks, a warmth that brings a faint pink flush to the cheeks of the youngest novice who has been assigned to assist in the kitchen this week. The warmth that releases the deep stiffness from the older joints of the kitchener brother who has stood at this very hearth for more winters than he cares now to count. Suspended over the central portion of the embers, hanging from the iron crane, swings the great cauldron of the morning's pottage. The cauldron is of darkened iron, its outer surface blackened entirely by long use, its inner surface gleaming the deep slow grey of well-seasoned cast metal. Its capacity is considerable, large enough to hold the soup for the entire community, with a small reserve in case of unexpected guests, and within it now simmers the slow patient mixture that will form the principal substance of the midday meal. The pottage is a thick warming broth of dried peas and lentils that have been soaking since the previous evening in a great earthenware crock, supplemented now with a careful selection of the winter vegetables that the cellarer has drawn from the cold storage cellars beneath the eastern range, generous handful of chopped onions, several roots of stored carrot grown coarsely fibrous through the long autumn but still sweet within, a few pale wedges of cabbage, a little turnip cut into small modest cubes. The fragrance that rises from this slow simmering pottage is the principal scent of the kitchen at this hour, a deep, warm, earthy fragrance that fills the chamber and drifts outward through the open doorway and along the southern passage, and even, in the early afternoon when the wind is right, into the very edges of the cloister walk itself. It is a fragrance compounded of the sweetness of slowly cooking onions, of the gentle starchy warmth of dried legumes yielding their substance to the broth, of the patient earthiness of the root vegetables, and of the small careful flavourings that the kitchener has added with his practised hand. Single bay leaf, a small bundle of dried thyme tied with a length of linen thread, a sprig of dried sage, a few peppercorns crushed between two stones upon the work table, a single small clove of garlic, careful pinch of salt drawn from the precious salt crock that is kept upon a high shelf beyond the reach of any wandering hand. The kitchener brother himself stands at the central work table, a broad heavy slab of well-scrubbed oak that occupies the middle of the chamber and serves as the principal working surface for all the chopping and mixing and preparing of the day. He is a stout, patient man somewhere in his middle years, his face flushed gently from the heat of the hearth, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows, his woolen habit covered by a long apron of coarse undyed linen that bears the faint stains of many previous mornings. His hands are large and capable, the hands of a man who has spent his life in honest labour, and they move now with the unhurried efficiency of long practice, slicing a small mound of stored apples into thin pale wedges that will be added to the pottage in the final hour to provide a gentle counterpoint of sweetness against the deeper savouries of the broth. Beside him at the work table stands his assistant for this week, the young novice whose name is Brother Anselm, no more than 19 years of age, his face still soft with the unfinished features of late youth, his cheeks bright with the warmth of his unaccustomed proximity to the hearth. Brother Anselm has been entrusted with the careful preparation of the bread for the midday meal, and he labours now over a great wooden trough at the further end of the work table, his hands deep within a soft, pale mass of dough that he has been kneading for some time. The dough rises and falls beneath his patient hands, folding upon itself, gathering its glutens, slowly developing the smooth elastic quality that the kitchener has shown him is the proper sign of completed kneading. Flour dusts his forearms in small pale clouds. Single small streak of flour has marked itself upon his cheek where he has reached up absent-mindedly to brush back a stray lock of hair, and neither he nor anyone else has yet noticed. Beyond the work table against the western wall of the kitchen stands the bread oven itself, a large rounded chamber of brick and stone built directly into the masonry, with a low arched mouth and a thick iron door currently open to allow the residual heat from the morning's earlier baking to subside before the next batch is set within. The interior of the oven glows softly with the deep orange of dying embers, and the warm mineral scent of hot brick and slow baking fills the immediate corner of the kitchen. The morning's first batch of bread has already been drawn from the oven and now cools upon a long rack of woven willow set against the wall. 6 broad round loaves of dark rye and barley bread, their crusts a deep, rich brown, almost to blackness in places, their tops marked with the small, simple cross that the kitchener traces with his knife upon every loaf before it enters the oven. The kitchen breathes its slow, warm breath. The pottage simmers. The dough rises. The bread cools. The brothers move with the patient, unhurried rhythm of useful work. And outside, beyond the high, small windows set near the ceiling, the snow falls softly once again upon the slowly waking valley. Step softly back now from the warm, fragrant kitchen, back along the southern passage, back into the cloister walk where the soft pearl light of the late winter morning has continued its patient, slow brightening upon the snow within the open garth. Pause here, beneath one of the slender stone arches, and let your imagined gaze rest for a long quiet moment upon the small still square of unbroken white that the garth has become. The eye, when it rests in this manner, begins to notice something that hurried looking can never quite perceive, a kind of slow, attentive seeing that the brothers themselves have spent their entire lives learning to cultivate, a way of looking that is itself almost a form of prayer. Notice, for instance, the way the light falls upon the snow. It does not fall in any single uniform sheet of brightness, the way one might at first assume look more carefully. The light is gathered and shaped and gently scattered by the overcast sky above, by the high stone walls that surround the garth on every side, by the slow drift of the morning hours that have moved the unseen sun a small measure further across its hidden path. In the centre of the garth, where the open sky most directly meets the earth, the snow glows with a faintly bluish luminescence, the colour of a goose egg held against a pale grey curtain, toward the edges where the long, low shadows of the colonnade reach gently outward across the white. The snow takes on a deeper, softer tone, the colour of cream that has stood in a stoneware bowl for a quiet hour, and in those deepest corners where the shadows pool the darkest, the snow becomes almost lavender, almost violet, a colour that exists only in winter and only in the deepest hollows of an unbroken drift, a colour that no painter has ever quite been able to capture upon any canvas, colour that lives only in the patient looking of the slow, attentive eye. This patient looking is itself the slow wisdom that monastic time has cultivated across the centuries. The brothers do not measure their days by the running hands of any clock, for there are no clocks here in the modern sense, no ticking mechanisms upon any wall, no insistent chiming of any quarter hour. Time is measured here by the slow turning of the natural day, by the rising and setting of the sun, by the gathering and softening of the light, by the slow procession of the 8 prayer hours that divide the day into its gentle ordered shape, matins in the deep middle of the night, lauds at the first softening of dawn, prime at the proper rising of the sun, terci in the 3rd hour of the morning, sext at the high noon, none in the 9th hour of the afternoon, vespers as the evening deepens, complin at the close of the day, 8 slow chimes of the bell, 8 slow gatherings of the community, 8 small still points around which the entire turning circle of the monastic day is patiently arranged. Within this gentle structure, time becomes something altogether different from the urgent clattering thing that the modern world has made of it. Time here is not a resource to be spent or saved or wasted. Time here is not a commodity. Time is a great kindly river that flows gently through the days and the seasons, carrying the brothers slowly along its patient current, asking of them only that they remain present within it, attentive to its small unfolding gifts, faithful to the small unfolding tasks that each hour places quietly into their hands. There is within this kind of time an extraordinary spaciousness. A single morning can hold within itself a whole small world. A single afternoon can stretch outward into something almost infinite. Single hour, given fully to a single careful task, can become a kind of small eternity in itself, complete in its own slow shape, lacking nothing that any longer hour could have provided. The brothers know this, though they would not always have words to express it. They have learned it slowly across the long unfolding of their patient years, by living within this gentle rhythm until the rhythm has become a part of the very structure of their bodies. The elder brothers, those who have lived within the rule for 40 or 50 or even 60 years, Move now with a quality of presence that the world beyond the walls would scarcely recognize, a quality of being fully and unhurriedly within whatever small task currently occupies their hands. When Brother Matthias dips his pen into the ink at his sloping desk in the scriptorium, he is entirely there, entirely within that small gentle gesture, entirely undivided by any thought of what the next hour might bring. When the Kitchener brother stirs his great cauldron of pottage, he is entirely within the slow circular motion of his wooden ladle, entirely attentive to the small bubbles rising softly to the surface of the broth. When the porter sits upon his low bench beside the small hearth in the gatehouse, his thumb resting absently upon the polished wood of his small cross, he is entirely within the soft warm hush of his quiet vigil, neither bored nor restless nor wishing himself elsewhere, simply present, simply waiting, simply being. This quality of presence is the slow gift that monastic time has given them, and it is a gift that does not come easily, nor does it come quickly, for the modern impulse, even within the medieval mind, is always to hurry, to grasp, to push forward into the next moment before the present moment has fully unfolded itself. The young novices struggle visibly with this in their first years within the enclosure. They fidget upon the choir stalls during the long offices. They glance toward the windows during the readings in the chapter house. They count secretly the verses remaining in the longer psalms, longing for the quiet pause that will come at the end of each office. The elder brothers see all of this with kindly understanding, for they remember when they themselves were so afflicted, and they know that the slow cure is simply the slow living of the days themselves, the patient repetition of the small tasks, the gentle accumulation of the unhurried hours, until at last the rhythm settles into the body, and the body settles into the rhythm, and the impulse to hurry quietly fades away. The bells of the church tower assist in this slow teaching. They ring at each of the appointed hours, their bronze voices rolling outward across the snow-blanketed valley, their slow, resonant tones reaching every corner of the enclosure and drifting outward beyond the walls to mark the hours of the surrounding farms and hamlets as well. The bells do not hurry. The bells do not chime the precise minutes that no medieval mind would even think to count. The bells simply announce that an hour has come, that an office is about to begin, that a small still point in the great circling day has been quietly reached, and the brothers, hearing the bells, leave whatever task currently occupies their hands, set down their pens or their ladles or their hammers, gather their cowls about their shoulders, and walk slowly toward the church to take their places once again within the long patient stream of the offices. This is the slow shape of monastic time. It is a shape that has been carved out of the centuries by the patient repetition of countless small ordinary acts, performed with care, performed with attention, performed with the slow accumulating wisdom of generations who have understood that holiness is not made of grand gestures but of small faithful presences, that the truly precious thing in any human life is not the rare extraordinary moment but the patient attentive quality with which the ordinary moments are inhabited. The brothers of this snowbound valley have built their entire lives upon this quiet foundation. They have given up much that the world beyond the walls would consider essential, much that the world would mourn the absence of, much that the world would struggle to understand how anyone could willingly relinquish. They have given up wealth, given up family, given up the freedom to come and go as they please, given up the small daily liberties that even the poorest peasant in the surrounding hamlets takes for granted. And in return they have received this. They have received the slow, patient gift of monastic time. They have received the spaciousness of the unhurried hour. They have received the small kingdom of the present moment given to them again and again every day, every hour, every patient breath. And in that small kingdom, in the gentle palace of the slow attentive day, there is a peace that the busy world beyond the walls can scarcely imagine. It is the peace of a mind no longer at war with its own time. It is the peace of a body that has learned to move in unhurried harmony with the slow turning of the seasons. It is the peace of a soul that has stopped trying to seize the future and has consented instead to live in the simple kindness of the unfolding now. It is the peace that has been carved into the very stones of these old walls by the patient breathing of all those who have lived here before, and it is the peace that drifts now gently like the slowly falling snow itself upon every quiet hour of this long winter day. Linger here beneath the sheltering arch of the cloister walk, while the gentle snow begins again its soft descent into the open garth, falling now in small slow flakes that drift sideways upon the faintest of breezes before settling at last upon the smooth pale surface that has been gathering itself since the early hours of the morning. Each new flake adds its small contribution to the slow accumulation of the day, joining the countless others that have already come to rest, indistinguishable now from those that fell before it, indistinguishable too from those that will fall in the slow patient hours yet to come. And in this gentle simple gesture of accumulation, of quiet anonymous contribution to a larger unfolding whole, you may begin to glimpse something of the deeper character of the place itself, something of the long quiet wisdom that the stones around you have absorbed across the slow centuries of their patient standing. For the monastery is not, in any meaningful sense, a place that belongs to any single generation of brothers. It is not the work of any single founder, nor the achievement of any single age, nor the accomplishment of any single human life, however long and devoted. The monastery is rather a long, unbroken thread, a slow, patient continuity, a gentle unfolding of one generation reaching toward the next across the long centuries, each generation receiving the work of those who came before, and adding to it, faithfully and modestly, the small contribution of its own brief season of stewardship. The walls that shelter you now were not built by the brothers who currently inhabit them. They were built by other brothers, brothers who lived and worked and prayed and slept, and were eventually laid to rest beneath the very flagstones upon which the present community walks. Look closely at the columns of the colonnade beside you. They are old, very old, older than any living memory within the enclosure can reach. Their pale stone has been weathered into a soft satin smoothness by the slow patient touch of countless hands across many quiet centuries, hands that rested upon them in passing, hands that steadied themselves against them on a slippery winter morning, hands of young novices and of elder brothers and of every age between, all of them long since gone, all of them reduced now to the gentle dust beneath the church floor, or to the soft humus of the small cemetery beyond the eastern wall, but all of them having left behind upon these patient stones the faint accumulated gloss of their living presence. The stones remember. The stones do not remember in any way that the philosopher would recognize as memory, but they remember nonetheless in the soft polishing of their surfaces, in the slow-worn hollows of their treads, the patient gentling of every edge that countless generations of woolen sleeves and patient palms have touched and touched and touched again across the slow unfolding of the centuries. Walk slowly now along the eastern walk, and let your gaze fall upon the floor of the cloister. It is paved with broad flagstones of pale grey limestone, and most of these flagstones are simply paving stones, plain and unmarked. But here and there set among them you will find stones that bear small, faint inscriptions, the names of brothers long since gone, the years of their lives carved into the surface in a small, simple script, sometimes accompanied by the gentle, modest symbol of their particular calling within the community, a small carved quill for a scribe, a small carved loaf for a kitchener, small carved pruning knife for the brother who tended the orchard. These are the burial stones of the most devoted brothers of generations past, those whose long faithful service to the house earned them the quiet honour of being laid to rest beneath the very flagstones of the cloister, where the daily passage of the living community would continue to walk gently above their resting bones, generation after generation, century after slow patient century. The current brothers know these stones, they walk over them every day. They know which flagstone bears the name of Brother Cuthbert, who served as cellarer for 43 years in the previous century, who introduced the brewing of a particular small beer that the community still produces according to his careful recipe. They know which flagstone bears the name of Brother Augustine, who copied 7 complete psalters in his long lifetime as a scribe, whose careful round hand can still be seen in the great choir books from which the present brothers sing the daily office. They know which flagstone bears the name of Brother Lawrence, who tended the herb garden for half a century, whose small careful notations upon the proper planting times of various medicinal herbs are still consulted by the present infirmarian when he prepares his winter remedies for the sick. The names are known, the lives are honoured, the slow continuity is preserved. And this preservation is not simply a matter of nostalgic remembrance, not simply a sentimental looking backward toward the lives of those long gone. It is rather a living and active continuity, a thread that runs unbroken through the present life of the community, a constant felt presence that shapes the very texture of every day. When the present cellarer goes down into the brewery to oversee the slow patient brewing of the small beer, he is following the careful method that Brother Cuthbert worked out long ago, adjusting only in the smallest details, refining only at the edges, but essentially preserving the slow accumulated wisdom of all those generations of cellarers who came before him. When the present scribe rules the lines upon a fresh page of vellum in the scriptorium, he is using the same proportions, the same spacing, the same careful guiding marks that Brother Augustine used in his time, that the scribes before Brother Augustine used in their time, that scribes have used within these walls since the very founding of the house. When the present infirmarian gathers the dried herbs from their wooden shelves in the infirmary store, he is consulting, often without conscious awareness of doing so, the patient seasonal wisdom that Brother Lawrence and his predecessors carefully gathered and faithfully recorded across the long centuries. The brothers of the present generation are therefore not isolated within their own brief moment of time. They are surrounded, embraced, accompanied by a vast quiet company of those who came before them. They labour at the same tasks, they sing the same psalms, they walk the same flagstones, they draw water from the same well. They sleep in the same dormitory upon the same straw-filled mattresses. They eat from the same wooden trenchers in the same long refectory. They sit upon the same stone bench in the same chapter house. They kneel at the same altar in the same great church. The forms of their daily life are the forms that have been polished and gentled and refined by all those who lived these forms before them, and within those forms they feel themselves to be participants in something far larger than their own individual lives, participants in a long, slow, patient work that began long before they arrived and will continue long after they themselves are laid beneath the cloister flagstones in their turn. There is a deep quiet comfort in this. The brothers do not, on the whole, find it morbid to walk daily over the burial stones of their predecessors. They find it, instead, deeply consoling. The presence of those who came before is not a sad presence but a kindly one. The gentle felt companionship of all those many quiet souls who once stood where the present brothers now stand, who once dipped their pens into ink upon those same sloping desks, who once stirred their cauldrons over those same hearth embers, who once climbed the same stairs to the same dormitory at the end of the same long winter days. The elder brothers of the present generation often speak quietly to the younger novices of this gentle continuity, of the comfort of knowing that one is not alone within one's calling, of the deep-felt certainty that one walks always within a great patient procession of faithful predecessors, that one is held by their accumulated prayers as one's own small prayers will, in their turn, hold the brothers yet to come. This sense of being held within a long unbroken thread shapes also the brother's relationship to their own labours. A brother does not in this place expect to see the full completion of any great work he undertakes. The scribe who begins a great illuminated psalter knows that he may not live to complete it, that another scribe may take up the work after him, that the slow, careful labour of the book will pass through several patient hands before its final binding. The mason who repairs a damaged section of the cloister wall knows that the wall itself will require further repairs in some future century, that some other mason yet unborn will come to this same wall with his own chisel and his own slow patience, that the building is a continuous unfolding work of which any single contribution is only a small modest part. The orchard brother who plants a new young apple tree this winter knows that he will not himself see the tree at its full mature bearing, that the brothers of 2 generations hence will be the ones who eat its proper harvest, that he is planting not for himself, but for those quiet successors who will inhabit these walls long after he has gone to his rest beneath the flagstones. And in this quiet acceptance of the long view there is a profound peace, a peace that the modern mind, with its fierce hunger for visible immediate results, can scarcely imagine. The brothers labour without anxiety for completion. They contribute without grasping for credit. They give their small, careful efforts to the slow unfolding work of the centuries, content to be one quiet stitch in a very long tapestry, content to be one small flake of snow in a slow, patient drift that has been gathering since long before they arrived and will continue to gather long after they have softly departed. Linger a little longer beneath the soft sheltering arches of the cloister walk, and let your gaze drift now to the surfaces of the stones around you, the small particular details that the unhurried eye begins to discover when it has finally consented to slow itself into the patient rhythm of monastic seeing. There is a great beauty here, but it is not the beauty of the new, not the beauty of the freshly finished, not the bright assertive beauty that announces itself from a great distance and demands the immediate attention of every passing eye. The beauty of this place is altogether different in its character. It is a quiet beauty, a slow beauty, a beauty that has been worked into the stones themselves by the long patient labour of weather and time and use. Beauty that reveals itself only to the looker who is willing to stand still and to look long and to look gently and to look without any particular hurry to move on toward the next thing. Consider, for instance, the column that stands nearest to where you have paused, one of the slender paired columns that supports the gentle arch above your head. When this column was first set in its place, perhaps 3 centuries ago or perhaps 4, it would have been pale and fresh and faintly luminous, the colour of newly cut limestone, smooth to the touch and uniform in its surface. The mason who shaped it would have been proud of his work, and he would have run his hand over the finished column with the small, quiet satisfaction of a craftsman who knows he has done his task well. The column would have been, at that moment of its first standing, a perfect thing, perfect in its proportions, perfect in its smoothness, perfect in the careful symmetry of its small carved capital. But that perfection did not endure, and the brothers who built this place knew, with a wisdom that the modern mind has largely forgotten, that the perfection was never meant to endure. Time began at once its slow, patient work upon the column. The first winter brought its cold rains and its small frosts that crept into the smallest pores of the limestone and softened the surface by the tiniest of imperceptible degrees. The first summer brought its warming sun that drew out the small impurities of the stone and laid them upon the surface as the faintest of pale dustings. The first decades brought the slow, gentle bloom of pale lichen which began to settle upon the column in small, soft circles of greenish grey, then of yellowish grey, then of the patient silvered grey that mature lichen achieves after many quiet years of slow growth. Hands began to touch the column, sleeves began to brush against it. Generations of brothers passed it on their daily walks, and each passage left upon it the most delicate trace of its presence, the smallest invisible polishing, the gentlest erasure of one tiny grain of stone. And the column today, the column at which you are quietly looking, is the cumulative result of all this patient work. Its surface is no longer smooth. It bears upon itself the fine, soft texture of long weathering, a texture that no fresh new column could ever possess, a texture that has been earned only through the slow consenting of the stone to the patient labour of time. Its colour is no longer the pale uniform white of new limestone. It is, instead, a soft mottled silver grey, deepening here and there into the patient bloom of mature lichen, lightening elsewhere into the warmer cream of the underlying stone where the lichen has not yet reached. Its base is faintly hollowed where the slow drips of rainwater from the eaves above have, across the centuries, worn the smallest of soft basins into the stone. Its capital, once sharply carved, is now gentled, the small acanthus leaves softened into something dreamlike and suggestive, their original crispness yielding to a quality of softness that the original mason could never have achieved with any chisel, however careful. And the column is more beautiful now than it ever was when new. This is the slow paradox that the brothers have come to understand. The column has become, through its long patient submission to time, something that no new column could ever be. It has acquired a depth of presence, a weight of being, a quality of having lived, that only the slow accumulating work of the centuries can confer upon any made thing. The brothers walk past this column every day, and they do not, for the most part, look at it consciously, for it has become so deeply part of their daily landscape that it requires no particular attention. But the column is there, faithfully holding up its small, quiet portion of the great vault above, weathered and lichened and softened and infinitely beautiful in its patient endurance. and the brothers feel its presence even when they do not look directly at it, the way one feels the presence of a very old friend in a familiar room. This same patient beauty has settled itself upon every surface within the enclosure. Look at the wooden door behind you, the door that gives back into the southern range. The wood of that door was once fresh oak, golden and warm and faintly scented with the green sap of recent felling. It is now the deep, almost black brown of oak that has stood through 3 or 4 centuries of weather, its surface grained into a fine, soft texture by the long, slow drying of its fibres, its iron strap hinges showing the patient pattern of small surface rust that has been polished smooth by the constant brushing of countless palms against the latch. The wood has been split in 1 or 2 small places along the lower edge by the slow dry contraction of its long aging, but the splits themselves have settled into the door's overall character, no longer flaws but small marks of authentic age, small quiet honesties that the door wears without shame. Look at the stones of the floor beneath your feet. They were once flat and even and freshly cut, each stone a perfect rectangle of pale limestone laid down in careful symmetry by the patient masons. They are now, after the slow passage of centuries, a soft, uneven landscape of worn hollows and gentle ridges, no 2 stones quite the same, each stone bearing upon itself the particular pattern of wear that the particular traffic of its position has imposed. The stones nearest the doorways are the most worn, hollowed into shallow, soft basins by the long passage of feet through the most travelled thresholds. The stones in the corners where fewer feet have passed retain something closer to their original flatness, though even they have been gentled by the long, slow work of the years. The whole floor, taken together, is a kind of subtle topographical record of the patient flow of monastic life across the centuries, a map of where the brothers have walked most often, where they have paused most frequently, where they have gathered and dispersed and gathered again across the long unfolding of their daily rhythms. This patient acceptance of imperfection and weathering has shaped also the brothers' relationship to their own bodies and their own slow aging. The elder brothers within the community do not regard their aging with the small persistent dismay that the world beyond the walls so often does. They regard it instead with the same patient acceptance that they regard the weathering of the stones around them. The slow stiffening of the joints, the gradual softening of the eyesight, the gentle whitening of the hair, the slow appearance of fine lines upon the face, all of these are received as the natural patient work of the same slow time that has worked so beautifully upon the columns and the stones and the wooden doors. They are not flaws to be fought against, they are not defects to be hidden, they are rather the small quiet markings of a life that has been faithfully lived within the slow rhythm of the days, and they bear within themselves a kind of beauty that the smoothness of youth could never possess. The face of Brother Matthias, the senior scribe, when one looks at it carefully in the soft morning light of the scriptorium, is a face of considerable beauty, though not the beauty that the world would commonly recognize as such. It is the beauty of fine soft lines worked into the skin by 60 years of patient attention, by the small habitual narrowing of the eyes that close work has gradually shaped, by the slow gentle smiling that decades of quiet contentment have engraved into the corners of the mouth. The face has been weathered the way the columns have been weathered, the way the doors have been weathered, by the long patient labour of a faithfully lived life, and the result is something deeper and more luminous than any unmarked youthful face could ever achieve. This is the slow grace of weathered things. This is the quiet teaching that the stones offer, freely and without instruction, to anyone willing to look at them with sufficient patience. The world is not made beautiful by being preserved in unchanging perfection. The world is made beautiful by being allowed to age, to settle, to soften, to gather upon itself the patient marks of its long endurance, and by being received in that aged condition with the same kindly love that one would give to any old and faithful companion. The brothers know this. The stones know this. The slow-falling snow upon the open garth knows this, and the long quiet centuries of these walls know it most deeply of all. Step softly back now to the eastern walk of the cloister, where the long quiet morning has continued to unfold itself with the slow patient rhythm that the brothers have so carefully cultivated across the long centuries of this place. The snow within the open garth has deepened a little since you last paused here, and the small soft flakes still drift down from the pale grey sky, settling themselves with the gentlest of unhurried gestures upon the smooth white surface that has been gathering since dawn. The light has shifted, almost imperceptibly, into the softer, fuller silvered grey of the late winter morning, and the long, low shadows of the colonnade have shortened just slightly upon the snow, marking the slow, patient progress of the unseen sun behind its thick veil of cloud. Pause here, and listen carefully, listen with the kind of patient, attentive listening that the brothers have spent their entire lives learning to cultivate. The kind of listening that the modern ear has almost entirely forgotten how to do. For, at first, the listening ear seems to discover only silence, a deep, profound silence that wraps itself around the cloister like a great soft woolen cloak, a silence so complete that it seems almost to have substance, almost to be a thing in itself, rather than the mere absence of sound. This silence is the most precious treasure of the entire enclosure, more precious even than the great choir books or the painted altar panels or the carefully tended hives of bees. It is the silence that the walls have been gathering for centuries, the silence that the rule has been protecting and nurturing and patiently cultivating across the long, slow generations, the silence that the brothers themselves have given up so much of their lives in order to inhabit and preserve. But listen longer, listen more patiently, for the silence of the cloister is not, in the strictest sense, a true silence at all. It is rather a vast quiet field within which the smallest sounds become audible, sounds that the noisy world beyond the walls would never permit to be heard, sounds that exist within their own small delicate registers far below the threshold of ordinary attention. And these small sounds, when one listens for them with sufficient patience, reveal themselves to be a kind of slow, gentle music, a music that the cloister has been quietly composing across the centuries, a music that asks nothing of the listener but the small willing gift of attention. There is, first of all, the sound of the falling snow itself. It is a sound so small that one might at first deny that it exists at all, but it is there, faintly, persistently, the smallest of soft whispers as each tiny crystalline flake meets the snow already settled below, multiplied across the entire surface of the garth, across the entire roof of the great church, across the entire slope of every gabled building within the enclosure. This small sound becomes a soft, continuous hush, a kind of breathing of the air itself, sound that fills the silence without ever quite breaking it, the way a very gentle breath fills the chest of a sleeping child without disturbing the deeper stillness of the sleep. Listen further. There is the small, soft creak of the old timbers as the slow cold contracts them within their settings. The great oak rafters of the cloister roof, the wooden posts of the colonnade, the ancient beams of the dormitory above the chapter house, all of them respond, in their slow, patient way, to the gentle pressures of the cold, and from time to time one or another of them releases a small dry creak, a small soft groan, a small patient sigh. These sounds are scattered through the long minutes of the morning at irregular intervals, and they are never loud, never insistent, but they are there. The slow breathing of the building itself, the small quiet voice of the wood that has been holding up this place across the long centuries. There is the soft, distant sound of the doves in their cote. The cote is set into the upper portion of the southern wall of the orchard, beyond the cloister itself. But on a still winter morning when the air is calm, the soft cooing of the doves drifts faintly across the snow-blanketed gardens and reaches the eastern walk of the cloister as a small, distant, musical murmur. It is the sound of birds at peace, birds settled into their roosts, birds that have eaten well that morning from the small handful of grain the orchard brother scattered upon their landing board. The cooing rises and falls in soft, slow waves, irregular and gentle, more felt than heard at this distance, a kind of small living music that the birds themselves are unaware of making, kind of small benediction that drifts unbidden from the warm shelter of the cote across the cold, quiet air of the winter morning. There is the occasional very small dry click of an icicle falling. The icicles have been forming all morning along the lower edges of the cloister roof tiles, where the heat of the slow sun upon the snow above has melted small, slow drips that have refrozen into the slender glass pendants you noticed earlier. From time to time, when an icicle has grown long enough that its own weight exceeds the small grip of its frozen attachment, it releases itself and falls, the tiniest of small crystalline clicks as it strikes the flagstones below, sometimes shattering into small bright fragments, sometimes simply rolling a short distance and coming to rest unbroken upon the worn stone. These small clicks are rare, perhaps no more than 3 or 4 in the course of an entire long morning, but each one is a small clear punctuation within the deeper hush, a small bright bell note within the slow continuous symphony of the silence. There is the soft distant sound occasionally of the brothers at their labours within the various buildings of the enclosure. From the kitchen, the muffled tap of the kitchener's heavy chopping knife upon the great oak work table, very faint at this distance, no more than a small soft rhythm at the threshold of perception. From the woodshed beyond the southern wall, the slow patient sound of the wood brother splitting kindling for the various hearths, the small dry crack of each split log, the soft thud of the splitting axe falling once again to its waiting target. From somewhere within the dormitory above, the very faint sound of a single brother coughing softly into his sleeve, the elder brother whose chest has been troubled in recent weeks and who has been excused from the morning's heavier labours to rest within the warmer air near the calefactory hearth. These small distant labours are heard not as interruptions of the silence, but as gentle living evidences of the community's quiet presence within it, like the soft heart sounds that one becomes aware of when listening carefully to one's own resting body, sounds that confirm the life of the whole even as they preserve the deeper stillness of the surrounding peace. The brothers themselves know this. They labour quietly. They speak rarely and only when necessary, and even then in the soft murmured voices that the rule prescribes. They have learned across the long years of their formation that the silence is itself a kind of corporate possession, a shared treasure that each brother holds in trust on behalf of all the others, a treasure that any careless raised voice would diminish for the entire community. And in this carefully tended silence, an extraordinary thing happens to the listening soul. The mind, accustomed to the constant din of its own internal chatter, begins very slowly to settle. The small, persistent thoughts that ordinarily occupy the interior of every waking moment begin very gently to release their grip. The endless, restless commentary that the modern mind keeps up upon its own experience begins very softly to fade, and in the space that opens up, a kind of quiet, listening attention takes root, a listening that is not directed at any particular thing but is simply present, simply open, simply available to whatever small gift the next moment may quietly bring. This is the slow gift of silence. This is what the brothers have given up so much of their lives in order to receive, and what they continue to nurture with such careful daily attention. They know that the silence is not the absence of life, but its deepest container, not the suppression of music, but its truest source, not the denial of the world, but the means by which the world's smallest and most precious voices may finally be heard. The cooing of a distant dove, the soft fall of a small flake of snow, the patient creak of an old timber, the small bright click of a falling icicle, the slow steady breathing of a brother kneeling at prayer in the chapel of St. Cuthbert, the gentle hiss of an oil lamp wick adjusting itself within its small reservoir, the faint dry whisper of a quill pen moving across a fresh page of vellum, all of these small sounds, gathered together within the patient embrace of the silence, become a kind of slow, continuous music, a music that the cloister has been performing for centuries, a music that asks for no audience and seeks no applause, a music that simply is the way the snow simply is, the way the stones simply are, the way the long quiet morning simply is, unfolding itself with the unhurried patience of all old and kindly things. And the listening soul, having entered into this music, having consented to slow itself enough to hear it, begins to feel itself softening, gentling, settling into the same patient rhythm. The breathing slows, the heartbeat eases, the shoulders, which have been unconsciously tensed, release themselves into a softer resting position. The eyes, which have been narrowed against the demands of the modern world, open into the wider, gentler gaze of patient, unhurried looking. And the whole being, gradually and without effort, begins to inhabit the slow, quiet kingdom of the cloister silence, becoming itself another small note within its slow, continuous music, another small flake within its slow, patient drifting, another small, soft presence within its long, unfolding peace. The long, quiet day has been unfolding itself all this while, with the unhurried patience that only winter knows, and now, somewhere in the middle of the slow afternoon, the light begins very gently to soften toward its evening close. You may have noticed it already without quite naming the change to yourself, the way the silvered grey of the sky has deepened into something a little warmer, a little more golden, the way the shadows of the colonnade have lengthened a little further across the snow within the open garth, the way the temperature within the cloister walk has drifted downward by the smallest of imperceptible degrees as the unseen sun begins its slow patient descent behind the western hills. The afternoon does not announce its turning. The afternoon simply turns, the way a slow tide turns, the way a sleeping body turns within its blanket, the way the slow breath of the world itself turns toward its evening exhalation. The brothers have continued their patient labours throughout the long afternoon, each of them at his own appointed task, each of them gently absorbed within the small, careful work that the abbot assigned that morning in the chapter house. Brother Matthias has continued at his sloping desk in the scriptorium, dipping his pen into the warmed ink, drawing the slow, careful letters across the fresh page of vellum, pausing now and again to flex his stiffening fingers above the small earthenware foot-warmer beneath his desk. The Kitchener brother has tended his great cauldron of pottage through the long, simmering hours, adjusting the heat of the embers, adding a final small handful of dried herbs in the last hour, stirring with the slow circular motion of his wooden ladle. The young novice brother Anselm has watched his loaves of dark rye and barley rise patiently in their wooden trays beside the warm hearth, then has set them carefully into the bread oven for their slow afternoon baking, and now stands quietly beside the oven door, listening for the small, soft sounds that will tell him when the loaves have reached their proper readiness. Throughout these long afternoon hours, the bells of the church tower have continued their slow, patient marking of the prayer offices. The bell of sext rang at the high noon, and the brothers gathered once again within the great church for the short midday office, and then dispersed for the principal meal of the day in the great refectory, where they ate their soft warming pottage and their dark coarse bread and their small portion of stored apples in the careful silence that the rule prescribes for the dining hour, while the appointed reader stood at the small lectern and read aloud to them from the writings of one of the old fathers. Then the brothers returned to their afternoon labours, and the bell of none rang at the appointed 9th hour, and they gathered again for the brief afternoon office, and then dispersed once more, and the slow patient labour of the afternoon resumed. But now, as the light begins its soft turning toward evening, a different rhythm begins to gather itself within the enclosure. The brothers begin, one by one, to bring their afternoon labours toward their slow, careful conclusions. Brother Matthias completes the final letter of the line he has been working upon, sets down his pen, dabs gently at the still wet ink with his soft cloth, and begins the slow patient work of cleaning his pen and capping his ink-pot, and folding his small protective cover over the page he has been copying. The Kitchener brother swings the great cauldron of pottage off the central embers and onto the cooler outer edge of the hearth, where its slow simmering will gentle into a soft maintaining warmth that will hold the broth ready for whatever supper the evening may bring. Brother Anselm draws his finished loaves from the bread oven, the dark crust a deep rich brown almost to blackness, the small simple cross still visible upon each top, and sets them upon the long willow rack to cool in the kindly air of the kitchen. You may drift now from the cloister walk toward the small narrow stair that leads upward into the eastern range, and there, instead of climbing toward the scriptorium as you did earlier in the day, you may turn aside into a small low corridor that runs along the inner wall of the upper story, corridor that gives access to a series of small chambers used by the sacristan brother for the storage and care of the various lamps and candles that light the entire enclosure. The sacristan, whose name within the house is Brother Theodore, is a thin, gentle man somewhere in his middle years, his face lined with the patient, kindly lines of a man whose entire daily work is the slow, careful tending of small flames. He has just begun, at this turning hour of the afternoon, the long, patient round of the evening lamp lighting, and you may drift behind him now, soft as a shadow, watching the slow, careful procedure that he has performed every winter evening of his long monastic life. Brother Theodore carries with him a small basket of woven willow lined with a soft cloth in which lie his various tools. There is a small clay oil pitcher full now of the pure golden olive oil that he has carefully decanted from the great storage jar in the cellarer's pantry. There is a small box of fresh trimmed wicks, each one carefully cut to its proper length and ready to replace any that have burned down too far during the day. There is a small pair of bronze trimming scissors polished by long use to a soft warm gleam. There is a small lit candle in a horn lantern, his own small portable flame from which he will kindle each new lamp as he goes. There is a small soft cloth for wiping the surfaces of the lamps clean of any drip or smear. And there is a small leather pouch of dried sage and lavender that he sometimes adds, in the smallest of pinches, to the oil of certain lamps in certain chambers, a small fragrant kindness that the rule does not require but that the long custom of the house has gently preserved. He moves now along the corridor with the unhurried, patient tread of long habit. He pauses at the first small bracket lamp set into the wall just outside one of the small chambers. The lamp is a simple vessel of glazed earthenware, shaped like a small, shallow boat with a slender spout at one end through which the wick emerges. He lifts the lamp gently from its bracket. He examines the wick, finds it still sound, leaves it in place. He pours a small careful measure of fresh oil from his clay pitcher into the small reservoir of the lamp, just enough to bring the level up to the full mark, no more. He returns the lamp to its bracket. He takes his own small portable flame from the horn lantern. He touches it to the tip of the wick. The wick catches with the smallest of soft sighs, drawing the oil upward into itself, and within a moment a small steady flame stands upright above the lamp, casting its modest amber pool upon the surrounding stones of the corridor. Brother Theodore pauses for a moment to be certain the flame has settled properly. He adjusts the wick the smallest fraction with the tip of his bronze trimming scissors. The flame steadies, lengthens slightly, takes on the patient upright quality of a properly tended lamp. He nods to himself the smallest of soft nods, and moves on to the next lamp along the corridor. This is his evening labour. This is the slow, patient work that he has been performing every winter evening for many quiet decades. There are perhaps 80 or 90 small lamps within the enclosure that require this evening tending, scattered throughout the cloister walks, the dormitory, the refectory, the warming room, the chapter house, the small chapels of the church, the gatehouse, the infirmary, the kitchen, the brewery, the various passages and stairs that connect them all. He will tend each one of them in turn before the office of vespers, and by the time the bell of vespers rings, the entire enclosure will glow softly from within, every corner illuminated by its own small steady flame. The whole great complex of buildings transformed into a kind of slow, patient lantern set within the deepening blue dusk of the surrounding snow. You drift behind him now, watching the slow procedure repeat itself at lamp after lamp. The pouring of the oil, the trimming of the wick, the gentle touching of the flame, the settling of the new light, the small soft nod of satisfaction, the unhurried movement on to the next lamp. The corridor brightens lamp by lamp. The light within the enclosure deepens lamp by lamp. The slow, gentle preparation for evening unfolds itself, lamp by lamp, with the patient, kindly attention that only a long, faithful soul can give to so small and so important a task. Outside, beyond the high small windows set near the ceiling of the corridor, the sky has continued its slow, patient darkening toward the deep blue dusk. The snow, which had glowed all morning and afternoon with its pale silvered light, has now taken on the soft, luminous lavender hue of snow at evening, holding within itself the last gentle gathering of the day's diffused light, giving back to the deepening sky the soft, pale glow that the falling flakes themselves once carried down. The shadows of the cloister have melted into the broader, gentler shadow of the gathering evening. The world itself seems to be settling towards sleep, and the lamps of Brother Theodore, kindled one by his patient, careful hand, become the small, steady answer of the enclosure to the soft fading of the day, a slow, gentle saying back to the darkening world that here, within these walls, the light has not gone out, the light will not go out, the light is being faithfully tended, lamp by lamp, hour by hour, century by patient century. The lamps have all been kindled now, each one tended by the patient hand of Brother Theodore, each one settled into its small, steady, upright burning, and the entire enclosure glows softly from within with the warm amber light of so many small, carefully tended flames. The sky beyond the high small windows has deepened into the soft velvet blue of full winter dusk, and the snow within the open garth has taken on the deeper lavender luminescence of evening, holding the last gentle whispers of the day within its small crystalline depths. The brothers have completed their afternoon labours, set down their tools, banked their fires, folded their working aprons, washed their hands at the small stone trough beside the kitchen door, and now the bell of vespers begins its slow, soft ringing across the snowbound valley. The brothers gather once again within the great church for the long evening office, their voices rising in the slow, unhurried plainsong of the evening psalms, the candles upon the altar burning their patient amber flames, the sanctuary lamp keeping its small ruby vigil within the deepening darkness above. The office unfolds itself with the same gentle patience as every office before it. The readings, the responses, the slow rising and falling of the chanted verses, the soft incense rising now in delicate pale ribbons from the swinging censer that the deacon brother carries before the altar. The fragrance of frankincense fills the great vaulted space, mingling with the deeper undertones of the beeswax, settling itself upon the cold stones, upon the worn flagstones, upon the dark oak of the choir stalls, upon the faces of the brothers as they sing their slow evening praise. When the office of vespers concludes, the brothers file out into the cloister walk, where the lamps now glow softly along the entire length of the colonnade, casting their small amber pools upon the worn flagstones beneath. They make their way along the southern walk to the great refectory, where the simple supper has been laid out by the cellarer brother and his assistants, a small modest meal of bread and a thin warming broth, a few withered apples, a small portion of soft cheese, and a wooden cup of the small beer brewed long ago according to Brother Cuthbert's careful recipe. The brothers eat in their accustomed silence while the appointed reader stands at the small lectern and reads aloud to them from the writings of one of the gentle saints, his voice rising and falling in the slow, quiet cadence that long practice has taught him. The supper draws to its slow, patient close. The brothers rise from the long benches. The cellarer and his assistants begin the slow, careful work of clearing the tables. The brothers file out into the cloister walk once more, and there, in the soft amber light of the evening lamps, they stand for a small, quiet moment of recollection before the bell of Compline begins its gentle final calling of the day. Compline is the last of the offices, the gentlest of them all, the small, soft prayer that closes the day and prepares the heart for the long quiet of the night. It is shorter than the other offices, briefer, more intimate, more tender. The brothers gather once again within the great church. But the church now is dimmer than it was for vespers, for many of the candles have been allowed to burn down, and only a few small flames remain, the two great candles upon the altar, the small ruby of the sanctuary lamp, single small candle at the lectern, and the small candles at the front edges of the choir stalls. The light is enough, just enough, for the brothers to see one another's faces softly across the central aisle, just enough to see the pages of the small book of Compline that each brother holds in his folded hands, just enough to allow the ancient familiar words to rise from the page into the slow patient singing of the office. The psalms of Compline are the gentlest of all the psalms, the evening psalms, the psalms of trust and rest and quiet committal of the day into the kindly keeping of the deeper stillness. The brothers sing them slowly, slowly, their voices softer now than they have been all day, the long unison of the chant settling into a kind of soft drifting murmur that fills the great vault above without ever quite breaking the deeper hush of the evening. The young novices who fidgeted and counted verses during their first matins many months ago now stand with their hands folded gently within the long sleeves of their habits, their eyes half closed, their whole being settled into the slow rhythm of the chant, having learned at last what their elder brothers have long known, that the office of compline is itself a kind of slow lullaby, a kind of gentle preparing of the soul for the long quiet of the sleeping hours ahead. The hymn of compline rises now, the soft ancient hymn that has been sung at this hour within these walls for so many centuries that no living memory can recall a time when it was not sung. The melody is gentle, undulating, falling slowly toward its quiet close at the end of each verse, and the words speak of the slow approaching night, of the patient kindly keeping of the soul through the dark hours, of the gentle waking that will come again with the soft return of the morning light. The brothers sing the hymn from memory, their eyes resting upon the dim-carved canopies above their stalls, their voices folded together into the single slow stream of the unison. The final blessing is spoken, the final amen is murmured, the final small bow is given, and then in the slow gentle silence that follows, the brothers stand for a long quiet moment within their stalls, neither moving nor speaking, simply being, simply present, simply allowing the long day to settle itself into the patient depths of the gathering night. The precentor inclines his head. The brothers begin at last to file out from their stalls. They move now in the slowest and gentlest of their many daily processions, their steps unhurried, their breathing quiet, their cowls drawn forward over their heads against the cool air of the cloister walk that awaits them beyond the church door. They pass through the small night door into the cloister, and the soft amber lamps along the colonnade greet them with their patient warm glow. They move along the eastern walk slowly toward the small inner stair that leads upward to the dormitory. The great silence has now begun. From the conclusion of compline until the first soft chimes of the small bell that will wake them again for matins in the deep middle of the night, no brother will speak a single word, save in the most extreme of necessities. The silence wraps itself around the entire enclosure like a great soft woolen mantle, deepening the stillness of every chamber, settling the dust within every corner, gentling the small flames of every lamp into their patient steady burning. The brothers ascend the small stair to the dormitory. They reach their own beds in the dim amber half-light of the single small lamp that burns at the far end of the chamber. They remove their outer habits and fold them carefully over the wooden chests at the foot of each bed. They slip beneath the heavy woolen blankets in only their soft linen tunics and their woolen stockings. They draw the covers up to their chins. They settle their heads upon the folded cloaks that serve them as pillows, and they begin, one by one, to release the long day into the kindly keeping of the sleeping hours ahead. Outside, beyond the shuttered windows, the snow has begun its slow, soft falling once again, the small flakes drifting down through the deep blue darkness of the winter night, settling upon the great roof of the church, upon the gabled rooftops of the cloister, upon the smooth pale surface of the open garth that has been gathering itself all day, deepening the slow patient drift, smoothing every shape, gentling every edge, until the entire enclosure becomes a single, slow, quiet whiteness within the deeper quiet of the surrounding valley. The breathing within the dormitory begins to slow. The 50 soft breaths of the 50 sleeping brothers fold themselves into a single, slow collective rhythm, rising and falling together, gathering and releasing together, the way a single sleeping body breathes within its blanket. The small lamp at the far end of the chamber burns its patient amber flame. The circator brother makes his soft, slow round along the length of the dormitory, his lantern held low, his sandaled feet silent upon the rush mats. He pauses for a moment beside each bed, listens for the steady breathing of the sleeper within, and moves on, satisfied, gentle, kindly, holding the long sleeping silence of the chamber within the careful trust of his quiet vigil. And you, dear listener, you who have drifted with me through this long, slow day of the medieval winter, you may now begin to release this small, kindly world from your patient attention, the way one releases a beautifully bound book back to its shelf at the end of a long, quiet evening of reading. The brothers are sleeping now, the lamps are tended, the fires are banked, the great church holds its small ruby vigil within the silent darkness above the altar. The sanctuary lamp burns on, as it has always burned, as it will always burn, keeping its slow patient watch through the long winter night. The snow falls softly. The stones rest within their long centuries. The slow breath of the sleeping brothers rises and falls within the dim amber light of the dormitory. The valley sleeps within its blanket of white. The world sleeps within the kindly arms of its long winter dreaming. And you may sleep too. You may release the day. You may release the small worries that have ridden upon your shoulders. You may release the small tensions that have gathered within your hands. You may release everything that does not belong to this quiet hour, and you may keep only what the slow breathing of the brothers has gently taught you, that the truly precious thing is not the rare extraordinary moment, but the small faithful presence within the ordinary one. That the truly beautiful thing is not the freshly perfect, but the patiently weathered. That the truly holy thing is not the great loud achievement, but the small kindly attention given freely and unhurriedly to whatever small task the present hour has placed quietly into your hands. The snow falls softly. The brothers sleep. The lamps burn on. The long winter night holds the world within its kindly keeping. And so, dear listener, may you too be held, may your breathing slow, may your shoulders soften, may your eyes grow heavy with the gentle weight of pleasant evening fatigue. May the small kindly silence of the medieval cloister come to rest upon you now, the way the snow comes to rest upon the patient stones, the way the lamps come to rest within their small steady flames, the way the brothers come to rest within their long, unbroken thread of quiet, faithful presence. Sleep now. Sleep deeply. Sleep well. And may the slow drifting snow of the long winter night carry you gently, gently, gently into the kindly keeping of your own deepest rest. Good night, dear listener. Good night. Welcome to Sleepy History with Henry. Here, we harness AI to breathe new life into authentic historical records, creating an immersive auditory experience. This entire production is AI-assisted, crafted solely for relaxation and sleep support. TAND is not a substitute for professional medical advice. Please do not listen while driving or operating machinery. Now, let Henry and AI guide you on a peaceful journey through the past.